Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Life Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Russell Reynolds, and we got a good show tonight. We're going to do something a little different than the paranormal. We're going to be talking about some serial killers, some from local Missouri and some well known serial killers. So, viewer discretion is advised on this because we will be talking about some bad men and women that done some real bad things to people and some of the history that I found of what they did to their victims. Um, we'll give you a rundown who we're going to be talking about tonight. We are going to be talking about Ray and Faye Copeland. They are the local Livingston County, Missouri couple. Um, we will be talking about another local Missouri guy, Robert Burdella, the Kansas City butcher. Dennis Rader, known as BTK, also Jeffrey Dahmer, and the infamous Plainsfield butcher, Ed Gein. So, without further ado, we're going to get this show started off. So, if you are sensitive to this stuff, viewer discretion is advised. So, um, we're going to kick this off with talking about Ray and Faye Copeland from Mooresville, Missouri. These guys actually, I live not too far from where their farm is, probably about 10 miles or so. Before we get started, I want to say hi to everybody in the chat. Hi, Brandy. Welcome in. BTK Photography. Welcome in. Randy again. Let's do this. Definitely. Angela Green. Welcome in. Hey, Greg. Welcome in. Let's see who else. Della. Welcome in. Jeanette. Welcome in. Bristol Blackwell. Welcome in. So I'm going to pull up my notes here on Ray and Faye Copeland. Faye Della Copeland, she was born on August 4th of 1921. She died December 23rd of 2003. And Ray Copeland, he was born December 30th, 1914, died October 19th, 93. They became, at the ages of 69 and 76, respectively, the oldest couple ever sentenced to death in the United States. They were convicted of killing 5 drifters at their farm in Mooresville, Missouri. When her sentence was commuted to life in prison in 1999, Faye Copeland was the oldest woman on death row. A little history: Ray Copeland was born in Oklahoma in 1914. While he was growing up, his family moved around, struggling to survive during the Great Depression. As a young man, he began a life of petty crime, stealing livestock and forging checks, until he was caught and served a year in jail. After his release in 1940, he met Faye Wilson, and they were married soon afterwards. They quickly had several children, and thanks to Ray's criminal reputation, had to keep moving their family around while money was tight. During that time, Ray served several jail sentences until he finally came up with a plan to improve his illegal money making methods so as to be undetected. Because Ray was well known as a fraud, he could not buy and sell cattle on his own. To get around this problem, he began to pick up drifters and hobos and employed them as farmhands on his property in Mooresville, Missouri. He would take his employees to the market where they would use his bad checks to buy cattle for him. After the transactions, Ray would sell the cattle quickly and the farmhands would disappear without a trace. For a while, the scam worked, but the police caught up and Ray was once again sent to jail. Upon his release, he resumed his criminal activities, but this time he made sure his farmhands were not as connected to him as before. This went on until a previous employee, Jack McCormick, called the Crime Stoppers hotline in August of 1989 to tell them about the Copelands. McCormick claimed that he had seen human bones on their farm while he was employed there, and also claimed that Ray tried to kill him. Police were initially skeptical of the claims, but after checking Ray's criminal record, they decided to investigate further. In October of 1989, they visit the Copeland farm armed with a search warrant, dozens of officers, and a team of bloodhounds. Initially, they did not find any incriminating evidence, but after further searching, the bodies of three young men were discovered in a nearby barn. As the search continued, more bodies were found, all killed with the same weapon, a 22 caliber Marlin, that was later found in the Copeland home. It became clear that Ray killed his employees in pursuit of money, but Faye's actions were initially questioned. When she went to trial in November of 90, her defense mounted a picture of her as a ditful wife and mother who had endured beatings and general ill treatment from her husband. However, the jury convicted her of 5 counts of first degree murder. She was given 4 death sentences for murders and 1 life sentence. In March of 1991, Ray went to trial and was convicted of 5 counts of murder and sentenced to death. Upon hearing that Faye had been sentenced to death by lethal injection as well, Ray showed no emotion and replied, "Well, those things happen to some, you know." Ray died of natural causes on October 19th, 1993. His body was cremated. Faye's attorneys appealed her conviction, contending that the jury had not been allowed to hear evidence that Ray had abused her for years. On August 6th of 1999, Judge Ordy D. Smith overturned the death sentence but let the conviction stand and commuted her sentence to 5 consecutive terms of life without parole. On August 10th of 2002, Faye suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak. Weeks later, in September of 2002, Governor Bob Holden authorized medical parole for Faye, fulfilling her one wish that she not die in prison. She was paroled to a nursing home in her hometown of Chillicothe, Missouri, where she died of natural causes at the age of 82. The following year, she left behind 5 children and 17 grandchildren. That's a little bit on Ray and Faye Copeland, and there is still bodies out there that are missing to this day. People are still looking for him. I mean, he did this throughout the whole Livingston County. They were finding bodies in barns. There's wells that bodies were thrown in, and he was not a good man. My ex girlfriend's grandfather used to work for Ray, and Ray wouldn't off him because he was well known in the community by people. So Ray wouldn't do nothing to him, but it just took that one guy to escape and actually call the cops on him for him to get caught. The farm is still standing to this day. The house is still there. The family still owns the whole farm and the property. Their sons had taken it over and they remodeled the house. They put vinyl siding on the house, and because they got tired of people coming out there and wanting to check out the legend of Ray and Faye Copeland. And so they ended up that she Faye was actually taking, which they didn't show this in the history, she was actually taking the drifters and the hobos' clothes and she was knitting quilts out of them to cover her husband. So that's why they got her also for the murders as well, because she was an accomplice to it by knitting quilts out of their clothes. And she tried to say that that was her husband's old clothes. And when they did the search, they actually found blood stains on those quilts. So he would take them, kill them on his farm, and then dump them off at other people's barns nearby, so they wouldn't come back to him. But yeah, he was not a good man, and they say for paranormal aspect that the farm out there is haunted. There's several people that have gone out there, but if you go out there now, you will be greeted with a shotgun. Um, Brandy says, fun fact, despite being in their 70s, Ray and Faye slept soundly each night in the same house where bodies were buried just yards away from him. Yeah, I mean, they did. They strung bodies clear out to Ludlow, Missouri, from what I heard Ray did, and they were still digging them all up. And I mean, it's just nuts what they did. Della says my mom had me pick up Bob. Oh, Bob Burdella. Yep, he's our next one we're gonna talk about is the infamous Kansas City Butcher, another nasty individual who died in Missouri State Penitentiary of heart failure, which was this guy right here. Weren't they worried? I don't think so. I don't think Ray had a worry in the world. I mean, he didn't care. Look how he treated his wife, and so I don't think he cared that the bodies they'd found the bodies. I mean, like I said, there's still some that are not accounted for that they're still trying to find yet. I know that case is not closed yet. So, but I don't think they'll ever find them anymore because I mean, you know how many years that's been now. Very nasty. So that the person that owns it now won't let paranormal. No, they won't let any paranormal ghost hunts out there. Their son owns the house. He owns the farm and the property. He actually lives there. So they will not let anybody come out there. You'll get you'll get probably threatened with a shotgun if you go out there, or they'll call the cops on you. Kansas City police torn down Bob's house down off Campbell. So our next one we're going to talk about is Robert Burdella. He, like I said, he's a bad. He was also a bad man too. He's no longer living. He died in Missouri State Penitentiary of heart failure. Um, he was born January 31st in 1949. Robert Andrew Burdella. He died October 8th of 92. He was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, tortured, and murdered at least six young men after forcing his victims to endure periods of up to 6 weeks of captivity. His crimes took place in Kansas City, Missouri between 1984 and 1987, describing his murders as being some of my darkest fantasies becoming my reality. Burdella pled guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of one of his victims, Larry Pearson, in August of 1988. He would later plead guilty to one further charge of first-degree murder and four charges of second-degree murder in December of 1988. He died of a heart attack while incarcerated at Missouri State Penitentiary in October of 92. Della became known as the Kansas City Butcher due to his practice of extensively dissecting his victims' bodies, which he would then dispose of in garbage bags, and the collector due to the movie, which he stated was the basis of the fantasies behind the modus operandi of his crimes. And early life, Robert Burdella was born on January 31st of 49 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, the first of two sons born Robert Andrew Burdella Sr., a die setter for the Ford Motor Company, and Mary Louise Burdella. Burdella's father was a devout Roman Catholic of Italian descent, while his mother was of German and British descent. Family regularly attended Mass, and both sons regularly attended religious education courses. As a child, Burdella was intelligent but a loner who rarely played outside his home and seldom had friends visit to socialize. He had a speech impediment and wore thick glasses from the age of 5 because of his severely nearsighted. He was also diagnosed with high blood pressure, for which he took several medications. Berdella was largely unathletic, where his younger brother, Daniel, 7 years his junior, displayed as aptitude for sports from an early age. Berdella's father valued sports and physical education and viewed his older son's lack of interest in sports as a sign of failure, often comparing him unfavorably with his younger brother. Occasionally, Berdella's father physically and emotionally abused his children, such as by beating them with a leather strap. Berdella performed well academically, though teachers often found him difficult to teach, partially due to his aloofness and his being the recipient of bullying by other students. Because of this, he seldom socialized with his peers. When Berdella reached puberty, he discovered that he was homosexual. Initially, he kept this fact a closely guarded secret, and he did not become open about his sexuality for several years. Nonetheless, in his early teens, he briefly had a girlfriend. Adolescence, by his mid teens, Berdella had begun to display a degree of aggression, becoming rude and condescending to others, particularly women. He learned about cooking and art and developed showmanship. Christmas Day of 1965, the Berdella family drove to Canton, Ohio to visit relatives. That evening, Berdella's father had a heart attack at the age of 39. 2 days later, Berdella returned to Cuyahoga Falls by himself. When he arrived home, his family told him his father had died. Berdella sought solace in his Catholicism, reading extensively about many faiths. He eventually became cynical about all religion. 1965, Berdella saw a film adaptation of the John Fowles novel The Collector. The plot of the film revolves around a disturbing man who stalks and then abducts young women who he finds attractive, holding her captive in the windowless stone basement and viewing her as little more than attractive specimen. After several weeks, the woman dies of contracted illness despite her captor's efforts to keep her alive. Berdella later stated that this movie had formed a lasting impression on him. Shortly after the death of Berdella's father, his mother remarried, an action that was met with resentment by Berdella, who viewed it as the form of betrayal against his father. As a result, he became increasingly withdrawn, further immersed himself in the solitary activities he had participated in since childhood, such as painting, collecting coins and stamps, and writing to foreign pen pals. Berdella would later claim that his hobby of writing to pen pals in countries such as Vietnam and Burma, and their sending him stamps and photographs of mythical and historical icons, ancient cultures, and architecture would lead to his avid interest in primitive art, photographs, and antiques. From approximately 1965, he began collecting such artifacts. This practice would inspire him to open his own antique business in 1982. Relocation to Kansas City, college years in the summer of 1967, Berdella graduated from Cuyahoga Falls High School. Throughout his studies in high school, he had earned such excellent grades, showed such potential. In 1966, one teacher had placed him in an independent study program. Shortly after graduation, Berdella relocated to Kansas City, enrolling in the Kansas City Art Institute with aspirations of becoming a college professor. In his first year at the KCAI, Berdella was considered an attentive, intelligent student, although by his second year he became vocally anti anti uh, authorian, becoming acquainted with a clique of students who supplied him with drugs, which he then sold to other students at a profit. In addition, he began regularly abusing alcohol. He also engaged in acts of animal torture On at least two occasions during one of these instances, he decapitated a duck in the presence of his peers, and in the second, he experimented with sedatives and tranquilizers on a dog. At the age of 19, Berdella was arrested for attempting to sell methamphetamine to an undercover officer. He was released after posting a $3,000 bond equivalent to about 27,100 as of 2025. He would later plead guilty to the offense and was handed a 5-year suspended sentence. 1 month after this first arrest, Verdella and two other students were arrested for possession of marijuana and LSD in Johnson County. On this occasion, Berdella could not post bond and he spent 5 days in jail. The charges against him and one of the other students would be dropped due to the lack of evidence. 4315 Charlotte Street. In 1969, Berdella voluntarily withdrew from KCAI after receiving harsh criticism from college administrators for killing and cooking a duck for the sake of art. He chose to remain in Kansas City. In September of that year, he moved into an address within Hyde Park District, 4315 Charlotte Street. By this stage, Berdella had been openly gay for several years. He began spending much of his free time with male prostitutes, drug addicts, and petty criminals and runaways. Berdella would typically befriend these individuals and then try to help free them from their drug addictions and criminal lifestyles, though he was adamant that throughout much of the 70s he had no physical contact whatsoever with any of them. To several of his neighbors, Berdella stated that he felt almost like a foster parent to many of those youths. By the early 1980s, many of his older acquaintances had ceased having any form of social contact with him. Berdella increasingly relied on these young men as a source of companionship and friendship. He would later claim to have become increasingly frustrated that many of these individuals were arrogant of his efforts to help steer them away from any self destructive behavior. But these later claims, Berdella would often engage in sexual relations with the men he befriended and would establish a degree of control over them, in part to engage in these sexual relations by loaning them money and allowing them to live rent free at his house for periods of time. To his neighbors, Berdella was considered flamboyant yet helpful and civic minded, despite the generally unkempt state of his property and his somewhat haughty attitude. Beginning in the late 70s, Berdella worked with the South Hyde Park Crime Prevention and Neighborhood Association, becoming their chairman in the late 80s and encouraging neighborhood watch patrol. He remained active in the association until the mid 80s when he left his position. Berdella also volunteered at fundraising events for a local public television station until the mid 80s. Shortly before Berdella moved into the Charlotte Street address, he began working as a short order cook in various restaurants around Kansas City, part to help pay lawyer fees and fines accrued from his previous drug arrests. For additional income, he also sold art and antiques he had collected via contacts and had established in Africa, Asia, South America, and various Pacific Rim countries. He initially operated this side business from his home. Both Berdella's cooking career and antique business flourished by the mid 70s. He began working as a senior cook at several renowned Kansas City restaurants. He joined a local chefs association and helped establish a training program for aspiring chefs as a local community college. At the same time, he devoted more attention to his own business. In 1981, he had established several contractual agreements with both national and international contacts for his antiques business. He viewed this as his full time job and later ceased working as a chef. Bob's Bizarre Bazaar Bazaar. In 1982, Berdella began renting his own booth at the Westport Flea Market. This store was named Bob Bizarre, and primarily sold and trade primitive art, jewelry, antiques. Although occasionally making a generous monthly profit, the income from this business was insufficient to maintain his expenses and to make ends meet. As a result, Burdella would occasionally steal or scavenge items to sell at his booth. He would also take lodgers at his home as a means of gaining additional income. At the flea market, Burdella became acquainted with a fellow merchant named Paul Howell, who operated a booth adjacent to his own. Soon, Burdella became acquainted with Paul Howell's younger son, Jerry. Initially, Jerry Howell and his friends taunted Burdella for his overt homosexuality, although, according to Burdella, Jerry Howell later confided to him that he and his friends occasionally earned money as male prostitutes. By the early 80s, Paul Howell had relocated his business to a store close to the intersection of 39th and Main Street, with his family living in an apartment above the shop. Burdella remained a casual friend of the family, offering his assistance if Jerry encountered any minor scrapes by the law. By the summer of '84, Jerry Howell had turned 19. And here we come to Robert Burdella's murders. Before we get into that, I'll just check the chat here and see if any questions. Gross fact, that's right. Murdered men were fed. Yep. And that's partially what got him caught, too. Let's see here. Yeah, I would love to investigate the Copeland farm. Kansas City police torn down. Yeah, victims were kept for days of agony and often tied up in the basement. While he tortured a lot. Even the Missouri State Penitentiary was telling us some of the history with Robert Burdella. Had given a guy a ride once, let him out around KC. His picture of him dead was on TV. He had killed him. No, just basements, also his yard, etc. Yeah, he was born in Ohio. For torturing his victims for days, he would dismember them in his bathtub, place the heads in the freezer, and stash mush tissue in the dog food bags just set out for the trash. Yep, not just basement, also his yard. For years, the neighbors never suspected that rotting human flesh sitting out on the curb just feet from their front doors. Yeah, I know. Can you imagine that? And even like, I'm surprised the animals didn't get into that, smelling that. I mean, like possums and raccoons, they'll eat that junk. 15 or 16 years old when that happened. Hey, Christine Marie, welcome in. Back after property was demolished, locals reported paranormal activity from whispers in empty lots and shadowy figures in nearby homes. Many believe the trauma embedded itself in the land. Oh, yeah, I'm sure that traumatic energy is just embedded in there. Russell, I have to look it up. Shout out to Monica Rollins, our Paranormal World YouTube. I'll cover two brothers in San Francisco, California area. They did something like Robert Burdella. Oh, wow. So we're going to move on to Robert Burdella's This is his first victim, the first known victim. Berdella is believed to have killed his first victim on July 5th of 1984 when he was 19 years old, Jerry Howell, and promised to drive the youth to attend a dancing contest and marry him. According to Berdella, he plied Howell with alcohol, di- diazepam, which some kind of drug, and acetylpromazine, both in his car and at his house until he became unconscious. He then injected Howell with a heavy tranquilizer before binding him to his bed. Howell was restrained to Berdella's bed for approximately 28 hours. Throughout this period of captivity, Berdella repeatedly drugged, tortured, raped, and violated him with foreign objects, repeatedly ignoring Howell's queries as to why he was being treated this way and his pleas to be freed. According to Berdella, Jerry either asphyxiated on his own vomit or the combination of the gag and the medicines were too strong for him to be able to catch breath. Berdella would later state that he briefly attempted to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation upon Howell after he had died and dragged his body into the basement. He suspended Howell's body above a large cooking pot and made several incisions to his inner elbows and jugular veins, leaving the body suspended in this position overnight to allow the blood to drain from his corpse. The following day, he dismembered Howell's body using a chainsaw and boning knives and wrapped the sections in newspaper and trash bags. Trash bags were later placed inside larger trash bags, which Berdella placed outside for a garbage crew to collect and take to the landfill site. When later questioned by officers investigating Howell's disappearance, Berdella claimed to have driven the youth to marry him as promised, where the two had parted company close to Howell's intended destination. Berdella further claimed that he had not seen him since. As would be the case with all Berdella's murders, he kept a detailed log in which he documented each act of sexual and physical torture inflicted upon his victim. Berdella would recall that, like his subsequent victims, Howell had repeatedly pleaded with Berdella to stop the abuse and torture, although Berdella would either ignore these pleas, taunt his victim, or threaten him. He would remain adamant to investigators that this was not for his enjoyment, but for what he called his physical and mental satisfaction. Subsequent murders on April 10th of 1985 and enter initiant former lodger, 20-year-old Robert Sheldon, arrived on Berdella's doorstep asking if he could stay at his house for a short time. According to Berdella, although Sheldon paid his rent responsibly, he considered him to be an inconvenience. Although he was not physically attracted to Sheldon, on April 12th, he drugged and held him captive because he returned home from work to find Sheldon in- intoxicated. Berdella was adamant that he held no firm malice towards Sheldon, but saw him as someone upon whom he could express some of his anger and frustration that he had towards other people. Sheldon was drugged with sedatives and held captive in the second floor bedroom for 3 days during forms of torture such as the swabbing of drain cleaner in his left eye, the insertion of needles beneath his fingertips, the binding of his wrists with piano wire with the intention of permanently damaging the nerves in his hands, and filling his ears with caulking to reduce his hearing capacity. 3 days after Berdella had begun holding Sheldon captive on April 15th, a workman came to perform a scheduled work on the roof of his home, leading Berdella to fatally suffocate Sheldon by placing a sack over his head, which he then tightened with a piece of rope. He later dissected Sheldon's body in the third floor bathroom. Following June found Mark Wallace, a very casual acquaintance who had previously helped him with yard work, hiding in his tool shed to seek shelter from a severe thunderstorm. As he been as had been the case with Robert Sheldon, Burdella invited him inside his house, and nothing Wallace's acute state of tenseness and depression volunteered to inject him with chlorpromazine with the explanation this would calm him down and relax him. Wallace willingly accepted the offer, and 30 minutes later, Burdella decided to render him captive. Wallace was carried to the second floor bedroom where he endured almost a day of captivity and torture, including the application of alligator clips to his nipples to facilitate electrical shocks to his body at any point at which Wallace began regressing into a state of unconsciousness. According to Burdella, 1 hour after his experimenting with hypodermic needles by inserting them into various muscles upon the victim's back, Mark Wallace died through a combination of the drugs, the gag, and the lack of oxygen. He noted this victim's time of death was being 7 p.m. on June 23rd. Increase of brutality on September 26th of 1985, Burdella answered a phone call from an acquaintance named James Ferris, who asked to stay at Burdella's home for a short time. Burdella agreed with the intention of kidnapping Ferris, whom he arranged to meet at a bar that evening. Despite the brutality to which he had subjected his first three victims, Burdella claimed that Ferris was the first victim upon whom he intentionally inflicted torture. He also informed investigators that there were occasions during his final three victim periods of captivity when he ceased making additions to his abuse logs because he assumed the victim would not be able to make it much longer. Burdella fought Ferris home and drugged him with crushed tranquilizers concealed in a meal, then tied him to his bed before torturing him almost constantly, approximately 27 hours. Torture included the repeated administration of 7,700-volt electrical shocks to the shoulder and testicles for up to 5 minutes in each instance, and acupuncture via hypodermic needles to the neck and genitals. Ferris gradually became delirious, but Burdella continued his physical and sexual assaults until he noted in his log that Ferris was unable to sit more than 10 to 15 seconds. The next entry read very delayed breathing, and finally Burdella noted that Ferris died with a slang term he had used in his career as a chef, 86, which Burdella later explained meant anything from throw it out to stop the project. Todd Stoops, a 23-year-old drug addict and occasional prostitute who, with his wife, had twice lived briefly at the Burdella's house in 1984. After Stoops and his wife moved out of Burdella's home, the second time Burdella did not see him again until a chance encounter in Kansas City Liberty Memorial Park on June 17, 1986. Burdella invited him to his house with the offer of lunch, and with the added incentive of sex, as Stoops stated, he needed $13 to purchase drugs, the equivalent of about $37 as of 2025. Burdella would later stress to investigators he had been extremely physically attracted to Stoops, and this victim was held captive for 2 weeks before he died. He gradually increased Stoops' terror, attempting to make him a cooperative and incapacitated sex slave. Burdella used electrical shocks through Stroop, closed his eyes in an attempt to blind him, and injected drain cleaner into his larynx to try to silence his screaming. During the second week of his capture, Stoops asked Burdella for a soft drink and a sandwich. When Burdella refused, Stoops burst into tears. On June 27th, he ruptured Stoops' anal wall with his fist, causing bleeding and discharged. Towards the end of the Stoops' captivity, he tried to feed his captive ice cream and soup, although Stoops wasn't able to keep anything down. By the final day of his captivity, Stoops was so weak, Berdella later stated he had been unable to breathe in a sitting position. On July 1st of 1986, Stoops died. A forensic pathologist later testified that the rupture anal wall caused septic shock, which proved fatal. In the spring of 1987, Berdella became friendly with 20-year-old Larry Wayne Pearson. This casual friendship began when Pearson entered his shop and explained to Berdella that as a child he has held an interest in both witchcraft and wizardry. Shortly thereafter, Pearson temporarily lodged with Berdella, willingly performed chores around his home as a means of paying rent. According to Berdella, he did not initially intend to capture Pearson, but began forming the plan to do so on June 23rd, 2 weeks after having bailed Pearson out of jail, and noting Pearson in the weeks prior to his captivity displayed little interest in finding a job. On the afternoon of June 23rd, Berdella and Pearson watched a movie, Creepshow 2, together before eating lunch. As the two drove around Kansas, the young man began jokingly referring to his practice of robbing gay men in Wichita. This disclosure finalized Berdella's decision to hold Pearson captive. That evening, Berdella ensured Pearson become intoxicated before injecting him with tranquilizers and moving him down to his basement, where he bound Pearson's hands above his head, then linked the rope he had used for his purpose to a brick column before injecting Pearson's larynx with drain cleaner. He then brought an electrical transformer to the basement. According to Berdella, Pearson was by far most cooperative of his six murder victims. On the fifth day of his captivity, having by this stage endured torture such as the repeated administration of electrical shock with the transformer and the breaking of several hand bones with an iron rod to render him submissive, Berdella deduced Pearson and earned his trust as to his continued cooperation in his sexual and physical abuse. As a form of reward, Pearson was moved to the second floor, with Berdella first informing Pearson that if he continued to cooperate, he would not continue to inflict as much pain upon him as he had done so. While he had been held captive in the basement throughout the later part of his 6 weeks of captivity, Pearson trained himself to sleep without moving so that he did not antagonize Berdella and thus invite further torture or return to the basement. After 6 weeks of captivity, Pearson deeply bit into Berdella's penis before screaming he could not continue to tolerate his ongoing poor treatment. In response, Berdella killed Pearson by first plunging him into unconscious with a tree limb, then suffocating him with a bag and ligature before driving to the hospital to receive treatment for his wound. Pearson's body was later dismembered in the basement and his head initially stored in a plastic bag in Berdella's freezer before being buried in the backyard. You did not choose to be here, but you are. For you to survive being here, and for you to, make it, it could either be rough or it could be easy. If I grow to like you and to trust you, then I could do special things for you, such as buy you cigarettes, pick up a movie on the way home from work, and so forth. Don't try to fight me, or you will get more of what you had earlier. You see, what you got is nothing compared to what you can have. And that was Robert Berdella conversing with Christopher Bryson, which is the final victim at 1 a.m. on March 29th, 1988. Berdella abducted his last victim, 22-year-old male prostitute Christopher Bryson, whom he lured to his house upon promise of payment for sex. At Verdella's home, Bryson was knocked unconscious with an iron bar and bound to Verdella's bed, where he was subject to similar methods of abuse and torture endured by previous victims, although in Bryson's case, Verdella repeatedly swabbed his eyes with ammonia before explaining to him, "The only things you need to think about are you and me in this house." After several days, Verdella explained to Bryson that he had begun to trust his captive and that although he was willing to discuss some aspects of the abuse and torture he was receiving, there would be no negotiations regarding his sexual abuse. Verdella finished this discussion with a stern warning: "I've gotten this far with other people before, and they're dead now because of mistakes they made." Escape. By the third day of his capture, Bryson had earned sufficient trust from Verdella to persuade him to establish a daily regimen of tying his hands in front of him after his sexual abuse rather than to the bed above his head, upon the excuse that his doing was so restricting that the circulation to his arms. He had also persuaded Berdella to leave a television on in the room with the remote control placed between his legs. Whenever Berdella was out of the room, Bryson later stated to investigators that he thought almost constantly about escaping. The following day, he managed to break free of his restraints by burning through them using a book of matches Berdella had inadvertently left in the room and within his reach when he had left the house to go to work. Wearing nothing but a dog collar, Bryson managed to escape from the house by jumping from the second floor window, breaking a bone in his foot. He ran toward a meter reader who was walking down the other side of the street, shouting for him to call police. The reader led Bryson to the house he had been approaching. The occupants called the police, who arrived minutes later. Questioned at the scene by four officers, Bryson initially claimed that he had been hitchhiking when abducted by Berdella, who had kidnapped, raped, tortured him for 4 days before he escaped by jumping from a window on the second floor of the property. Berdella had kept him bound to the bed on the second floor of the house throughout much of the time, repeatedly sodomizing him, drugging him, and injecting his throat with drain cleaner to diminish his ability to speak loudly. As Bryson spoke, the officers also noted that in addition to the dog collar and broken foot, Bryson had red swollen eyes and visible scars and welts across his entire body. Two officers were told to maintain discreet surveillance of the property. Bryson was driven to the Menorah Medical Center for treatment, accompanied by a third officer, while the fourth officer radioed the Kansas City Police Department to request a formal search warrant of the property. Arrest. During the later questioning at the KCPD, Bryson divulged that his captor had shown him Polaroid images of men who appeared to be deceased, and he was told that he would never leave the property and that if he became a nuisance or threat, he would either be subject to a greater levels of torture than what he had already endured or simply be killed. On the afternoon of Bryson's escape, Berdella was arrested on charges pertaining to the sexual assault of Christopher Bryson. He declined to allow officers inside his home, but the earlier requested warrant to search Berdella's property was drafted and the officers gained access to the property the same day. Corroborating Bryson's claims of having been restrained and tortured in the second floor bedroom, investigators discovered the bedroom on the second floor had burnt ropes attached to the post at the foot of the bed. Also in the room was an electrical transformer plugged into the wall with wires leading to the bed. A metal tray containing syringes, small bottles apparently containing prescription drugs, swabs, and eye drops were also close to the bed. Also found in the room were a long iron pipe, various lengths of rope, and leather belts. Investigators also noted that posts on the bed had been extensively worn, suggesting that restraints had earlier been tied to them and that the individual or individuals had struggled themselves free. Searching the house and grounds of 4315 Charlotte Street, investigators uncovered a human skull inside a closet on the second floor of his property and a partially decomposed human head in the backyard. The search also uncovered several human vertebrae scarred by both hacksaw and knife marks stowed in the hallway. 44 and several human teeth stowed in two envelopes. Both a hacksaw and a miter saw were discovered in the basement of the property, and a chainsaw was also found to be soiled with bloodstains, flesh, and pubic hairs. Luminol tests revealed that the floor of Berdella's basement and two plastic trash barrels were extensively bloodstained. 334 Polaroid pictures and 34 snapshot prints of various men were also found in Berdella's house. These pictures showed Christopher Bryson and several other men, both in life and in death. Many of the images have been taken while the subjects were being tortured. The search also uncovered numerous restraints and sexual devices, pornographic literature, hypodermic needles, and a book on narcotics. Officers also discovered a stenographer's pad containing detailed torture logs that Berdella had maintained for each victim, laying atop a chest of drawers. Several newspaper clippings from the Kansas City Star mentioning missing young men named Jerry Howell and a wallet and driver's license belonging to a missing person named James Ferris were discovered in a closet on the second floor of the property. Task force and further investigation before the search of Berdella's property had concluded. The KCPD assembled the special task force of 11 detectives and one sergeant to focus exclusively on the Berdella case. This task force extensively researched Berdella's history, discovering that he was well known among Kansas City male hustlers, having earned a reputation for preying on transparent young men. Several of these male prostitutes were also reluctant to accept him as a client, both because of his penchant for drugging, injecting, and torturing his sexual partners and acquaintances, and also because he had been considered a suspect in the disappearance of two men whose personal possessions had been found in his house, Jerry Howell and James Ferris. Missing person reports had been filed for both of these men, and Berdella had extensively questioned in relation to these disappearances. He denied having anything to do with the disappearances despite being considered a prime suspect in both cases being placed under surveillance. Police had been unable to find any solid evidence linking him to either men's disappearance in both instances. After having his initial statement to police, Berdella indignantly refused to talk further without having a lawyer present. His lawyer would later threaten to file harassment accusations against police unless their questioning and surveillance of him ceased. James Ferris's wife identified him in several Polaroids found at Berdella property, some taken after her husband's death. Paul Howell formally identified one picture of a young man hanging upside down in Berdella's basement as his son. Several other Polaroid images depicted as yet unidentified men, and several detectives were assigned to identify them, determine if they were alive or dead. If alive, the circumstances of the picture, s- since several of these images depicted the section of the body of the photographer. On April 13th, Berdella was ordered to pose nude for a series of photographs in the same precise angles as the evidence photos for comparison with the original Polaroid images. As numerous male names have been found scrawled upon various stenographer's pads at Berdella's address, the detectives began attempting a trace on each of them. One of these traces, a young man named Freddie Kellogg, was able to state to detectives that he had several other young men had intimately lodged with Berdella since the early 80s, and that Berdella had been in the habit of playing with his lodgers with drugs, typically interventrously before engaging in sex with them, regardless of whether they consisted or not. Kellogg stated that in order for him to be allowed to lodge with Berdella, he must agree to persuade young men from whom Berdella found attractive to attend parties at Charlotte Street so that Berdella could drug them. Should Berdella ever discover that any of them was a police informant, he would use his knowledge to blackmail him. Despite this threat, Kellogg stated that numerous male prostitutes and addicts have been reluctant to engage in any form of contact with Berdella because of the rumors of his link to the 1984 disappearance of Jerry Howell. And they were able to identify the ones that were missing by dental records. They formally charged Berdella was formally charged with one count of felonious restraint, one count of assault, and 7 counts of forcible sodomy. As investigators continued their investigations into discoveries at his property, he was assigned a temporary public defender at his legal representative and held in protective custody in Jackson County Jail in lieu of $500,000 bail, the equivalent approximately of $2 million as of 2025. In late April, they found a skull inside Berdella's closet. And they identified via dental records obtained via subpoena from the University of Kansas Medical Center as that of Robert Sheldon. Berdella was formally charged with murder by dismemberment of Larry Wayne Pearson in July after the head discovered in his backyard was formally identified. And on July 22nd of 88, a grand jury formally indicted Berdella for murder of Lawrence Wayne Pearson. Following months, he was arraigned and pleaded guilty in the Fourth Circuit of Jackson County Court before Judge Alvin C. Randall to the first-degree murder of Larry Pearson. The plea entered the following a late morning recess in the arraignment hearing into this particular murder and came as a surprise to both the judge and prosecuting attorney. The prosecution team assigned to the case accepted the plea, with Assistant Prosecutor Pat Hall later explaining this decision as being in the best interest of our client, the people of the state of Missouri. Following the submission, the acceptance of this plea, the judge insisted that Berdella confess under oath as to Pearson's death. In response to questioning by his attorneys, Berdella stated, "I put a plastic bag over his head and tied it with rope and allowed him to suffocate." When asked if he performed this act deliberately with malice afterthought, Berdella simply stated yes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Upon being sentenced, Berdella was transferred to the Missouri State Penitentiary to commence his life sentence. He would later be temporarily placed in protective custody at the Potosi Correctional Center due to concerns of his safety. Second guilty plea submitted before Jackson Court on August 24th earned Berdella a further life term without parole for one charge of forcible sodomy against Christopher Bryson, 6 counts of sodomy and one charge of assault being dropped as part of a plea bargain. He would also receive a further term of 7 years pertaining to one count of felonious restraint against Bryson on this date. On December 19th of 88, Berdella formally waived his rights to be tried for any of the outstanding murder charges upon the understanding he was to be convicted of one further count of first-degree murder, that of Robert Sheldon, and 4 counts of 4 counts of second-degree murder. He formally pled guilty to each of these charges before Judge Robert Myers in the Jackson County Circuit Court. Members of the public were prohibited from attending this hearing, with only family members of his victims and news reporters permitted access to the proceedings. In response to those guilty pleas, Judge Myers imposed 5 further concurrent life sentences with additional condition bearing any further prospect of parole and sole case of first-degree murder in which Berdella pleaded guilty. Berdella provided testimony to prosecutors between December 13th and 15th. After charge changed his plea, he sought approval for their agreement not to seek the death penalty against him if he fully confessed. In this testimony, Berdella claimed the movie he had first seen in '65, The Collector, had left a major impression on him. Following the sense of shock and disgust he claimed to have initially experienced after killing his first victim, the movie had resurfaced in his memory and subsequently became a motivating psychological force in actions with exhibited against his victims in his subsequent murders. His victims, he stated to investigators, had lost any degree of humanity in his eyes once he had chosen to render them captive. These were not my people that I thought of. Once I had them bound and was using them, they became something other than people to me. I never thought it out to the level of what if one of those bodies ever gets loose? So that's a little interesting on Robert Padella. So yeah, he was a bad man. To this day, some believe the tape was destroyed, hidden, possibly taken as a sick collector's item. Yeah, I see they did actually make a movie of it. So it was torture to that simple degree, whole mess with the mind. Yeah, yeah, that was. And supposedly he used sleep. Yep. Have a good night, Brandy. Get to feeling better. Fun unknown fact: police recovered hundreds of photos. Yeah, they said like 300 photos they recovered from him. And when he died in Missouri State Penitentiary, he was saying that the guards weren't giving him his heart medication. So that's why he ended up dying of a heart attack because he had heart issues. And so he was claiming that they weren't giving him enough of his heart medication, which who knows, back then they may not have because of the sick stuff that he did. And it's like that picture we caught that was in the museum up there, which is the old warden's house at the Missouri State Penitentiary. And hey, Cynthia, welcome in. We're just talking about some serial killers tonight. Turn out you wonder how they become this way. Sad how his family raised him. Yeah, I mean, he was raised Catholic. He went to Catholic church and everything, and then something just snapped in him. Serial killers not born, they are made. Usually start, yeah. Trauma from home, being bullied is another good form of how serial killers are made because they just get mentally abused so bad they just can't take it anymore, and something just snaps inside their head. Yeah, I mean, negative energy. Tony Sparrow and I talked about this one other time. What possesses like an innocent person to do something like this? Demonic influence is another good way too. Yeah, that's a level 5 prison. Yeah, one of the bloodiest 47 acres of Missouri. Missouri State Pen is. Russell, I think Leonard Lake and Charles Ng started their crime in the early 80s and got caught around 1985. So this was around the same time as Robert Burdella. Yeah, agree. Starts with the background, like you said, the bullying. Yep. Yeah, I mean, getting bullied in school, like he was. He was bullied in school and stuff like that. And then you just get that something just clicks. This was the actual documentary movie right here that was made about Robert Burdella. And he was to hear some of that stuff that he did and that man that got away, they were telling me at Missouri State, the tour guides, that the man was running down the street naked when he met that meter maid. And and that's how they caught him. So we're gonna move on. Uh our next one is a well-known serial killer, Mr. BTK. And if he's still in the chat here, BTK Photography, him and I have been talking about it. He's actually, it's not out yet. He's got, keep an eye out for it. He's got a book. He interviewed BTK. So, and that's why his name is kind of BTK Photography, which BTK, there was a movie about him as well, which is played by my favorite horror movie actor, Kane Hodder. He, uh, he did the BTK movie, which if you guys haven't seen it, check it out. It's actually legit on the BTK crime spree. Russell, another case finding someone who escaped. Can you imagine being the person and you were asked for help by exactly, yeah. That is crazy. Okay, so BTK, he's known as Dennis Lynn Rader. He was born March 9th, 1945, better known as the BTK Strangler, or simply BTK. He is an American serial killer who murdered at least 10 people in Wichita and City Park, Kansas between 1974 and 1991. Although he occasionally killed or attempted to kill men and children, Rader typically targeted women. His victims were often attacked in their homes and bound, sometimes with objects from their homes, and either suffocated with a plastic bag or manually strangled with a ligature. In addition, he stole keepsakes from his female victims, including underwear, driver's license, and personal items. Rader often sent taunting letters to police and media outlets describing his crimes in detail. In 2004, after a 13-year hiatus, Rader resumed sending letters, leading to his 2005 arrest and subsequently guilty plea. He is currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. Life and background of Dennis Lynn Rader. Dennis Lynn Rader was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas on March 9th of 1945. His parents were bookkeeper Dorothy May Rader, Nene Cook, and Kansas gas service worker William Evelyn Rader. He was the eldest of four sons growing up in Wichita. Rader later recalled feeling ignored by his mother. Both of his parents worked long hours and paid little attention to their children at home. From a young age, Rader harbored sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women. He also exhibited Zoodaism by torturing, killing, and hanging small animals. Rader acted out sexual fetishes for voyeurism autoerotic asphyxiation, and cross dressing, often spying on female neighbors while dressed in women's clothing, including women's underwear that he had stolen. He also masturbated with ropes and other bindings around his arms and neck. Years later, during his cooling off periods between murders, Rader would take pictures of himself wearing women's clothes and female masks while bound. He later admitted that he was pretending to be his victims as part of his sexual fantasy. However, Rader kept his proc- proclivities well hidden and was widely regarded in his community as normal, polite, and well mannered. After graduating from Wichita Heights High School, Rader attended Kansas Wesleyan University. He received only mediocre grades and dropped out 1 year. After 1 year, Rader served in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970. On discharge, he moved to Park City, a suburb of Wichita, where he worked in a meat department of an IGA supermarket where his mother was employed as a bookkeeper. Rader married Paul Dietz on May 22nd of 1971. They had two children, Carrie and Brian. He attended Butler County Community College in El Dorado, earning an associate degree in electronics engineering in 1973. He then enrolled in Wichita State University and graduated in 1979 with a Bachelor of Science degree majoring in Administration of Justice. Ritter initially worked as an assembler for the Coleman Company, an outdoor supply company. He then worked at the local Wichita office of ADT Security Service from 74 to 88, where he installed security systems. Ironically, many of his clients were concerned homeowners seeking security from his own killings as BTK. Rader was a field operations supervisor for the Wichita area for the 1990 federal census. In May of 1991, Rader became a dog catcher and compliance officer in City Park. In this position, neighbors recalled him being sometimes overzealous and extremely strict, as well as taking special pleasure in bullying and harassing single women. Two women he stalked in the 1980s and one whom he stalked in the mid 90s filed a restraining order against him. One of these women also changed her address to avoid him. One neighbor complained that Rader killed her dog for no reason. Rader was a member of Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita and at one point was elected president of the church council. He was also a Cub Scout leader. By the 2000s, the public memories of the murders had begun to fade. Local author Robert Beatty began writing the book about the killings, Nightmare in Wichita, after being shocked that so many young people he spoke to had never heard of the BTK case. Hungry for attention, Rader reemerged as BTK in 2004 after learning that the book was being written. On July 26 of 2005, after Rader's arrest, his wife was granted an emergency divorce waiving the normal 60-day waiting period. In an interview with ABC News in 2019, his daughter Carrie stated that she writes to her father and has now forgiven him, but still struggles to reconcile her normal childhood with the knowledge that she was raised by the BTK killer. However, at the 2004 Crime Con in Nashville, Tennessee, Carrie revealed excerpts from her father's journal that revealed he had sexually abused her when she was a child. Confirmed murders, O'Terrier murders. On January 15th of 1974, Rader murdered four members of the O'Terrier family in Wichita. Family were Joseph O'Terrier Sr., 38, Julia Marie Julie Ontario, 33, Joseph Joy Ontario II, 9 years old, and Josephine Josie Ontario, 11. Their bodies were discovered by the family's three older children who had been at school at the time of the killings. On the morning of the murder, Rader parked his car and walked to the Ontario home, scaled a fence, and cut the phone line. When in the backyard, it was after this that Joey let the dog out the back door to the backyard where Rader confronted him and forced his way into the home at gunpoint. Initially, the family thought he was pulling a prank. Rader asserted that it was not a joke and clarified that he had a .22 hollow point pistol. Rader told the Ontario family that he was wanted in California before ordering them at gunpoint to lie on the living room floor. Then he led the family into the bedroom and bound them with rope he had prepared ahead of time. Joseph and Joey were on the floor while Julie and Josie were on the bed. Family began complaining of circulation issues. Joseph complained of a cracked rib, so Rader put a pillow under him. Rader later stated that it was around this time that he decided to kill him. Rader covered Joseph's head with a plastic bag, which he then secured with ropes. After Joseph chewed a hole in the bag, Rader replaced it, causing him to slowly suffocate. Rader strangled Julie with a rope. At one point, he regained consciousness and pleaded for mercy for her children, prompting Rader to kill her. Rader then placed another plastic bag, followed by two T-shirts and additional bag over Joey's head. Rader watched him struggle from the chair set up in the bedroom. After the arrest, the family was murdered. Rader took Josephine down to the basement. Rader undressed Josephine and tied a noose around a sewer pipe in the basement. Rader asked Josephine if her father had a camera so he could take pictures, to which she responded no. He then said that she would go to heaven with the rest of her family, and Rader then hung the girl in the basement and masturbated as he watched her struggle on the rope. On the way out of the house, he got in the Ontario family car and drove it to the parking lot to the Dillon's grocery store. He realized that he had dropped a knife in the backyard of the Ontario home, so he drove his car back to the house to retrieve it. After his 2005 arrest, Rader confessed to the Ontario murders and claimed that the first targeted the family 2 months prior when he spotted Julie leaving to take her children to school and stalked them for 2 weeks straight, 2 to 3 weeks. Murder of Catherine Bright. Rader planned to murder Catherine Bright, referring to her as Project Lights Out. Rader picked her for his next murder victim after he spotted her entering her house with a friend. He had no knowledge of her younger brother, Kevin, 19, living at the same house, which might have dissuaded him from targeting her. He was trying to stay away from the males as much as possible in order to make killings easier. On April 4th of 74, Rader broke into the home through a sliding glass door in the back to find no one was home yet. He began sweeping up the glass to try to minimize suspicion. When Catherine did arrive, the delegate trigger of his pistol caused an accidental discharge. He feared that the smell of gunpowder would alert Bright. She home shortly with Kevin. He told them that he was a wanted man from California and needed money and food. He was described as a stocky man wearing a silver wristwatch, sweating profusely. Rader forced the Bryce into the southeast bedroom where he made Kevin tie Karen up for Rader bound Kevin himself. Rader used household supplies, including bandanas and restraints, in order to distinguish the crime from the Ontario murders. Kevin and Catherine were separated in the different rooms with Kevin tied to a bedpost and Catherine to a chair. Rader turned on the stereo system in the living room to drown out any sounds of struggle, which he later claimed was a trick he learned from detective magazines. Rader returned to the bedroom where Kevin was restrained to strangle him, but Bright had freed himself. Rader then pulled his firearm, and a struggle ensued during which Rader shot Kevin in the forehead. Rader then attempted to strangle Kevin again, resulting in a similar struggle in which he fired two more shots, one landing just above Kevin's mouth and the other grazing him. Kevin played dead until Rader left the room. and ran from the house. He flagged down neighbors who took him to the hospital and called police. When Rader entered her home, Catherine was asked about the gunshot. Rader told Catherine that he had shot her brother, at which point she fought back. Catherine's resistance proved too strong for Rader to strangle her as planned. The Rader resorted to stabbing her repeatedly in the area under her rib cage. Rader heard Kevin call for help during the struggle. Once Catherine was dead, Rader grabbed her keys, ran outside, and tried to unsuccessfully to start Bright's truck. When it did not start, Rader ran to his car, which was parked at Wichita State University. Catherine was alive when police arrived at her house holding a telephone in her hands, but partially verbally unresponsive. She died in emergency surgery from multiple stab wounds and strangulation. Murder of Shirley Ruth Relford on March 17th of 77. Rader had a different victim planned for the day, but the victim was not home. She was frustrated by he was frustrated by this and did not and decided to find a random person to kill instead. While looking for a potential victim, he come across Shirley's son Steve walking down the street. Rader approached Steve claiming to be a detective and asked him if he could identify individuals in a photo. Rader showed Steve a photo of his wife and daughter, who Steve mistakenly identified as his mother and sister. He then followed Steve back to his mother's house. At the Relford residence, Rader asked Shirley if he could identify the same photo. During this interaction, Rader pulled a gun and forced his way into the home. He claimed that he was a wanted man and that they were being robbed. Rader attempted to tie up the three Relford children but struggled to do so, leading him to force the children into the bathroom, which he barricaded with Shirley's assistance. Rader reported giving the kids toys and supplies to keep them comfortable while he murdered their mother. He threatened to shoot the children if they broke free. After this, Rader took Relford to the rear bedroom. Relford vomited before being tied to her bedpost by her legs and handcuffed. Rader strangled her with rope after placing a plastic bag over her head. During the murder, Shirley was sick and asked for water, which Rader provided prior to strangling her. Rader later confessed that he intended to eventually kill the children in the bathroom. However, the family phone rang and one of the children shouted that it was someone who would be visiting shortly. The Rader fled the home. Murder of Nancy Jo Fox. Rader had been stalking Nancy Jo Fox for some time and had decided he was going to kill her. He gave her the name Project Fox Hunt. On December 8th of 1987, Rader broke into Fox's home through the back window after discovering she was out. After some time, Fox returned and began screaming at Rader to leave her house and that she was going to call the police. Rader informed her that her phone lines were cut and she would not be able to make any calls. Rader informed her that he intended to restrain her, take photographs of her, and rape her. He let Fox smoke a cigarette before this. Rader allowed Fox to go to the bathroom after she assured him that she could not escape. Rader ordered Fox to come out of the bathroom partially undressed. Rader began to undress and he ordered her to lay down. When she emerged from the bathroom, Fox resisted when Rader tried to remove her remaining clothing. Rader then began putting handcuffs on Fox, to which she protested and questioned the need for. Rader told her, "That's part of my deal. I've got to have them or it won't work." Rader began to crawl on top of Fox and wrap his belt around her neck. He would repeatedly loosen and tighten the belt, allowing her to come close to unconsciousness and then bring her back before eventually killing her. The following day, Rader called police from a payphone telling them that they would find Fox's body at her home. BTK asked for Recognition. The subliminal message to Raider, which was flashed by Kane TV in 1978 on February 10th, 1978. Raider sent another letter to Wichita television station Cake claiming responsibility for the murders. He suggests many possible names for himself, including BTK. He demanded media attention in this second letter, saying, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" A poem was enclosed titled "Oh Death to Nancy," a parody of the lyrics to the American folk song "Oh Death." In the letter, Rader claimed to be driven to kill by Factor X, which he characterized as a supernatural element that also motivated Jack the Ripper, the Son of Sam, and the Hillside Stranglers. He also asked for the police to send him a hidden message in response, and with the knowledge that the BTK killer watched Cake, police decided to flash a subliminal message during one of the station's evening newscasts. For a split second, the message stated, "Now call the chief," and featured a drawing of an upside down pair of glasses, which were found at the Fox crime scene. They hoped the message would influence the killer to turn himself in, but it was unsuccessful. Attempted murder of Anna Williams. During this time, Rader also intended to kill others, such as Anna Williams, 63, who in 79 escaped death by returning home much later than expected. Rader explained during his confession that he became obsessed with Williams, was absolutely livid when she evaded him. He recalled spending hours waiting at Williams' home, but becoming impatient and leaving when she did not return from visiting friends. Murder of Maureen Hedge. Rader and had been stalking Maureen Hedge, 53, for some time and had given her a name, Project Cookie. She lived only a few houses up from Rader, and he selected her just to see if he could murder one of his neighbors and get away with it. Rader was attending a Cub Scouts outing on April 27th, 1985, the night of the murder. He had faked a headache, blaming the rainy and muddy weather, and said he was going to go to bed early. He quietly left and drove to a deserted area where he quickly changed out of his Cub Scouts attire. He then drove to a bowling alley across the street from Brittany Center at 21st Street and Woodlawn. He walked in, ordered a beer, swished it in his mouth, and splashed it on his face and clothes. He then called a taxi using a fake slurred drunk voice. He was dropped off one street down from his and Hedge Street. Rader cut the phone lines to Hedge's home and managed to break into the home without damaging too much. He then hid in a closet. After some waiting, Hedge came home with her boyfriend, leading Rader to wait even longer in the bedroom closet until he left, and for Hedge to get into bed. After he was confident Hedge was in bed, he crept out of the closet and quickly flipped on the bathroom light switch. Hedge woke up and began screaming. Rader subdued and handcuffed Hedge before strangling her to death. Rader then wanted to remove her from the house, tie her up, and take pictures of her. After finding her car keys and collecting mementos, Rader stripped Hedge and dragged her out to her car. He drove her to the Christ Lutheran Church, where he was a longtime member and key holder. He dragged Hedge's body into the building and covered the windows before turning on the lights, ensuring no light would be visible from the outside. He then began positioning the body in the church, taking photographs of the corpse. As daylight was approaching, Rader cleared the scene, removed the garbage bags off the windows, turned off the lights, and returned the body to the trunk. Rader drove off a little distance away and dumped Hedges' nude body in the remote ditch and covered her with brush. Murder of Vicky Wergler. At this time, Rader was working for ADT and was out working when he saw Vicky Wergler, 28, get into her car. He stalked her for a little bit before learning she played piano after hearing her playing it when prowling around outside her house. He referred to her as Project Piano. On September 16th of 86, Ritter used one of the company's hard hats and a Southwest Bell manual to act as a repairman or technician for the telephone company. Rader first gained entry into Wergel's neighbor's house and pretending to do telephone work before leaving and knocking on Wergel's door. He did this to make her less suspicious. Once in the house, Rader told Wergler that he had to check the telephone terminals. Wergler directed him to the phone near the dining room table. Rader made small talk with Wergel as he pretended to check the phone after declaring the phone line looked okay. Rader pulled a gun on Wergler and instructed her to go to the bedroom. Wergler told Rader that her husband would be home soon, but he persisted. Rader forced her into the bedroom where Wergler broke free of her bonds and fought back. She scratched Rader's face hard enough that at the time of his confession 20 years later, Rader testified that he probably still had the scratch somewhere if you look. Struggle upset the Wergler's dogs, who began barking. Rader grew nervous because the windows were open and he did not know when Wergler's husband would be home. Rader did not have much time, but he took pictures after killing her for sexual purposes. Rader fled with Wergler's car and passed Vicky's husband on the way out. Rader parked the car in a grocery store parking lot and drove back home in his car. He had passed that Wergler home. He saw EMS responding. The murder of Dolores Davis. Rader had seen Dolores Davis, 62, not far from where he lived and stalked her for a while. Rader codenamed Davis Project Dogside because of the dog kennels north of her home. Rader cased the Davis home many times trying to figure out a plan, but being able to figure out a way to break in. Rader used Trapper Scouts outing as cover for the murder. On January 18th of 91, the Trappers were having their annual Dead of Winter outing at Harvey County Park West. Rader went to the park and set up camp before fabricating a story and leaving. Rader then drove to his parents' house and got undressed out of the trapping scout clothes. Rader then drove to Park City Baptist Church, to which he had a key because of his Boy Scout duties. Rader left the church, walking through wheat fields and cutting through a cemetery to get to the Davis home. His fear cold drove Rader to break in by smashing the window rather than trying to break in more quietly. The time was 10:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. when Rader arrived at the Davis home, where he could see Davis reading through the window blinds. Rader waited until lights had been out for a few minutes, then threw a cinder block through the sliding glass door. Davis ran out of her bedroom yelling. Rader used his wanted man ruse on her. He said he would tie her up and leave her, but take her car and some food after taking some time to warm up. Davis refused and told him to leave, at which point Rader informed her that he had a gun, a club, and a knife on his person. Davis then became cooperative. Rader obtained the keys to her car and rattled around in the kitchen pretending to look for food. Rader believed that while he was tying her up with a pair of pantyhose, that Davis realized that he was going to kill her. She begged for her life, prompting Rader to strangle her with pantyhose. Rader initially was going to take photos with the body, but Davis had lied to him and said that somebody was coming soon, forcing him to leave sooner than he had planned. Rader used a bedspread to drag Davis's body from her car and put her in the trunk. Rader drove her car to the Kansas Department of Transportation lake, where he dumped her body in the bushes. Rader drove back to Davis's home and threw her keys on the roof, having read that the police had looked for the Orterio's keys on the roof of their home. Rader walked back to the Baptist church to pick up his car. Rader drove back to KDOT, collected the body, and drove out to a rural area where he dumped the body underneath the bridge. Rader did not take any pictures the night of the murder because he needed to get back to camp before his absence was noticed. Davis was discovered on February 1st of 91 by a 15-year-old boy, Nelson Schock. Schock's dog went under the bridge and the boy followed, then was unable to call it back to the street. On August 23rd of 2023, the Associated Press reported that Rader was considered the prime suspect in two further killings in Oklahoma and Missouri. Authorities discovered possible trophies from victims after launching a search for evidence at Rader's former Park City home, resulting in an investigation of his potential involvement in additional unsolved disappearance and murders. Cynthia Dawn Kinney, 16, was last seen in Osage, Oklahoma on June 23rd, 1976, at the Osage laundromat. Witnesses said she left the laundromat at 9:30 a.m. and got into a faded beige 1965 Plymouth Belvedere. In 2023, Osage Sheriff Eddie Verdon claimed that Rader had been identified as a prime suspect after it was determined that he was involved in Boy Scouts events in the area, and when it was learned that Rader had included the phrase "bad wash day" in his writings, a bank was also having new ADT alarms installed across the street from the laundromat when Kenny went missing. Rader was regional installer for ADT at the time. Furthermore, Rader was allegedly claimed to have fantasized about kidnapping a girl from a laundromat. Rader has denied involvement in the murder, which Virden believes is due to possibly being tried in Oklahoma and potentially be giving the death penalty cold case. By 2004, investigators of the BTK killer was considered a cold case. However, Rader initiated a series of 11 communications by local media, which led directly to his arrest in February of 2005. In March 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter from someone using the name Bill Thomas Gilman, claiming that he had murdered Vicky Burglar in 1986, enclosed which with the message were photographs of the crime scene and a photocopy of Wurgler's driver's license, which had been stolen at the time of the crime. Prior to this message, it had not been definitely established as Wurgler's was killed by BTK. DNA collected from under her fingernails provided police with previously unknown evidence. They began DNA testing hundreds of men in an effort to find the killer. Altogether, more than 1,300 DNA samples were taken later destroyed by court order. Rader's letter to Wichita Eagle under the name Bill Thomas Gilman in May. Cake received a letter with the chapter headings for the BTK story, fake IDs, and word puzzles. On June 9th, package was found taped to a stop sign at the corner of First and Kansas roads in Wichita, which contained graphic descriptions of the Orterio murders and the sketch labeled "The Sexual Thrill is My Bill." Although enclosed was a chapter list for the proposed book titled The BTK Story, which mimicked a story written in 1999 by Court TV written crime writer David Lohr. Chapter 1 was titled A Serial Killer is Born. In July, a package dropped into a return slot at a public library contained more bizarre materials, including the claim that BTK was responsible for the death of 19-year-old Jake Allen in Agnoria, Kansas, earlier that month. This claim was false, and that death was ruled a suicide. After his capture, Rader admitted in his interrogation that he had been planning to kill again, that he had set up dates October 2004 and was stalking his intended victim. That month, a manila envelope was dropped into a UPS box in Wichita. It contained many cards with images of terror and bondage of children pasted on them, a poem threatening the life of the lead investigator, Lieutenant Ken Landauer, and a false autobiography which made details about Rader's life. These details were later released to the public. In December 2004, Wichita police received another package from the killer. This time, the package was found in Wichita's Murdoch Park. It contained a driver's license of Nancy Fox, which was noted as stolen from the crime scene, as well as a doll that was symbolically bound at the hands and feet with a plastic bag tied over her head. In January 2005, Rader attempted to leave a cereal box in the bed of a pickup truck at a Home Depot in Wichita, but the box was discarded by the truck's owner. It was later retrieved from the trash. Rader asked what had become of it in the later message. Surveillance tapes of the parking lot from the date revealed a distant figure driving a black Jeep Cherokee, leaving the box in the pickup. In February 2005, more postcards were sent to Cake, and another cereal box left in a rural location was found to contain another bound doll. In his letters to police, Rader asked if his writings, if he put on a floppy disk, could be traced or not. Police answered his question in a newspaper ad posted in the Eagle, saying it would be safe to use the floppy disk. It would be safe to use the disk. On February 16, 2005, Rader sent a purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk to Wichita station KAS-TV. Also enclosed was the letter, a gold-colored necklace, and a large medallion, and a photocopy of a cover of Rules of Prey, a 1989 novel by John Sanford about a serial killer. Police found metadata embedded in a deleted Microsoft Word document that was known to Rader, still stored on a floppy disk. It was a church meeting agenda written and edited by Dennis himself. The metadata contained the words Christ Lutheran Church, and the document was marked the last modified by Dennis. An internet search determined that a Dennis Rader was president of the church council. When investigators drove by Rader's house, a black Jeep Cherokee was parked outside. This was strong circumstantial evidence against Rader. They needed more direct evidence to detain him. Police obtained a warrant to test a pap smear taken from Rader's daughter. At the Kansas State University Medical Clinic, DNA test showed a familiar match between the pap smear and the sample from Wergler's fingernails. This indicated that the killer was closely related to Rader's daughter, and combined with other evidence was enough for police to arrest Rader. Suspect in BTK killings arrested after 25 years in hiding. Rader was arrested while driving near his home in Park City shortly after noon. On February 25th of 2005, an officer asked Mr. Rader, "Do you know why you're going downtown?" Rader replied, "Oh, I have a suspicion why." Officers from Wichita Police, Kansas Bureau of Investigations, and FBI and ATF searched Rader's home and vehicle, seizing evidence including computer equipment, a pair of black pantyhose retrieved from a shed, and a cylindrical container. Christ Lutheran Church, Rader's office, and the main branch of the Park City Library were also searched. At a press conference next morning, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams announced the bottom line: BTK is arrested. Rader asked about the death penalty and inquired several times about what his potential sentence would end up being. Rader further asked whether he would be assigned to a special section of the prison or among the loonies in general population. In February 28, 2005, Rader was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. Soon afterwards, the Associated Press cited an anonymous source alleging that Rader had confessed to other murders in addition to those with which he had been connected. However, the Sedgwick County District Attorney denied the story, yet refused to say whether Rader had made any confessions or if investigators were looking into a possible involvement in more than unsolved killings. On March 5th, news sources claimed to have verified by multiple sources that Rader had confessed to the 10 murders and was charged with but no other ones. On March 1st, Rader's bail was set to 10 million and the public defender was appointed to represent him. On May 3rd, the judge entered not guilty pleas on Rader's behalf, and Rader did not speak at his arraignment. However, on June 27th, the scheduled trial date, Rader changed his plea to guilty. He described the murders in detail to the court and made no apologies. At Rader's August 18th sentencing, victims, families, and state made statements, after which Rader apologized in a rambling 30-minute monologue. At that, prosecutor likened to the Academy Awards acceptance speech. His statement had been described as an example of an often observed phenomenon among psychopaths, their inability to understand the emotional content of language. Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years. Kansas did not enforce the death penalty at the time of the murders. On August 19th, Rader was moved to El Dorado Correctional Facility. That's a little bit on BTK. So, yeah, he's another. Have a good night. Have a good night, cuz. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Um, so yeah, he's another bad dude. And actually you can actually see if you look at his mugshot there. Hey Sandy, welcome in. We're talking about some serial killers tonight. Um, were horribly mutilated, throat slash, organs removed, some even. Oh yeah, but you can see in his mugshot, you can see some scars from where he was scratched on the face. Yeah, that is quite a story what he did. And to see another thing, what snapped in him, I mean, he was a church going guy and Cub Scout leader. That's another good thing. Like with his parents, again, not paying attention to him and stuff. Another good example of why a person like that snaps. So we're going to move on to our next one. And like I said, make sure you check out the movie BTK. Hey, Amy, welcome in, which is a definitely good movie. Uh, Kane Hodder does a very good character of BTK in that movie. So our next one we're gonna move on to is you guys know him, Jeffrey Dahmer, which there was also a movie about Jeffrey Dahmer also. Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. Jeffrey Dahmer is another one of those that are big, well-known serial killers out there. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, he was born May 21st of 1960. He died November 28th of 1994, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. He was an American serial killer, sex offender, who killed and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, typically all or part of the skeleton. Um, Although he was diagnosed borderline personality disorder, schizo, schizoepal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, Dahmer was found to be allegedly same at his trial. He was convicted of 15 of the 16 homicides he had committed in Wisconsin and was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment on February 17th, 1992. Dahmer was later sentenced to 16-term life imprisonment for an additional homicide committed in Ohio in 1978. On November 28th, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at a Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Yeah, which I believe he was beat to death in prison. His early life childhood, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born May 29th, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the first of two sons to Lionel Herbert Dahmer, a Marquette University chemistry student and later a research chemist, and Joyce Annette Dahmer, a teletype machine instructor. Lionel was of German and Welsh ancestry, and Joyce was of Norwegian and Irish ancestry. Some sources report Dahmer was deprived of attention as an infant. Other sources, however, suggest that Dahmer was generally doted upon as an infant and toddler by both parents, although his mother was known to be tense, greedy for both attention and pity, and argumentative with her husband and their neighbors. As Dahmer entered first grade, Lionel's studies kept him away from home much of the time. When he was home, his wife, hypochondriac, who suffered from depression, demanded constant attention and spent an increasing amount of time in bed. On one occasion, she attempted suicide using Equinil. Neither parent devoted much time to their son, who later recollected that from an early age he felt unsure of his solidarity of the family, recalling extreme tension and numerous arguments between his parents during the early years. Dahmer had been an energetic and happy child, but became notably subdued after undergoing double hernia surgery shortly before his fourth birthday. In elementary school, Dahmer was regarded as quiet and timid. One teacher recollected and detected early signs of abandonment due to his father's absence and mother's illness, the symptoms of which increased when she became pregnant with her second child. In elementary school, Dahmer had a small number of friends. In October of 1966, the family moved to Doylestown, Ohio. When Joyce gave birth in December, Dahmer was allowed to choose the name of his new baby brother. He chose the name David. The same year, Lionel earned his degree and started work as an analytical chemist in a nearby Akron. From an early age, Dahmer manifested an interest in dead animals. His fascination with dead animals may have begun when, at the age of 4, he saw his father removing animal bones from beneath the family home. According to Lionel, Dahmer was oddly thrilled by the sound the bones made. He became preoccupied with animal bones, which he initially called his fiddlesticks. He occasionally searched beneath and around the family home for additional bones, and then explored the bodies of live animals to discover where their bones were located. In May of 1968, family moved to Bathtown, Summit County, Ohio. This address was their third in 2 years and the Dahmer's sixth address since marriage. The home stood in 1.5 acres of woodland with a small hut, a short walk from the house where Dahmer began collecting large insects and the skeletons of small animals such as chipmunks and squirrels. Some of these remains were preserved in jars of formaldehyde and stored within the hut. 2 years later, during a chicken dinner, Dahmer asked Lionel what would happen if the chicken bones were placed in bleach. Lionel, pleased by what he believed to be his son's scientific curiosity, demonstrated how to safely bleach and preserve animal bones. Dahmer incorporated these preserving techniques into his bone collecting. He also began collecting dead animals, including roadkill, which he would dissect and bury beside the hut, with the skulls occasionally placed atop makeshift corpses. According to one friend, Dahmer explained that he was curious as to how animals fit together. In one instance, in 1975, Dahmer decapitated the carcass of a dog before nailing the body to a tree and impaling the skull upon a stick in the woodland behind his house. As a prank, he later invited a friend to view the display, claiming he had discovered the remains by chance. The same year Lionel taught his son how to preserve animal bones, Joyce began increasingly her daily consumption of Equinol, laxatives, and sleeping pills, further increasing her emotional distance from her husband and children. Adolescence and high school, Dahmer pictured in 1978 Revere High School yearbook. From his freshman year at Revere High School, Dahmer was seen as an outcast. By the age of 14, he had begun drinking beer and hard alcohol in the daylight hours, frequently concealing his liquor inside the jacket he wore to school. When a classmate was asked why he was drinking scotch in the morning history class, Dahmer shrugged and said, "The alcohol was my medicine." Although largely uncommunicative communicative in his freshman year, Dahmer was seen by staff as polite, highly intelligent, but only average grades. He was a competitive tennis player and played briefly in the high school band. When he reached puberty, Dahmer discovered he he was gay. He did not tell his parents. In his early teens, he had a brief relationship with another teenage boy. Although they never had intercourse, by Dahmer's admission, he began fascinating about dominating and controlling a completely submissive male partner in his early to mid-teens, and his masturbatory fantasies gradually evolved into his focusing on chests and torsos. These fantasies gradually became intertwined with dissection. When he was at when he was about 16, Dahmer conceived a fantasy of rendering unconscious a particular male jogger he found attractive and then making sexual use of his body. On one occasion, Dahmer concealed himself in the bushes with a baseball bat to lie in wait for this man. However, the jogger did not pass by on that particular day. Dahmer later admitted this was his first attempt to attack and render an individual submissive to him. Dahmer was known to his high school peers as a class clown who often staged pranks, which became known as doing a Dahmer. These include bleeding and simultaneously epileptic seizures or cerebral palsy at school and local stores. Occasionally, Dahmer would perform these antics for money to purchase alcohol. By 1977, Dahmer's grades had declined. His parents hired private tutor with limited success. The same year, in an attempt to save their marriage, his parents attended counseling sessions. They continued to quarrel frequently. When Lionel discovered Joyce had engaged in a brief affair in September of 1977. They decided to divorce, telling their sons they wished to do so. So, I can't pronounce the words, amicably. The process of their divorce soon became increasingly bitter and acrimonious, and Lionel moved out of the house in early 1978, temporarily residing in a motel in North Cleveland, Malleson Road. In 1978, Dahmer graduated from high school. A few weeks after his graduation, one of his teachers observed Dahmer sitting close to the school parking lot drinking several cans of beer. When the teacher threatened to report the matter, Dahmer informed him he was experiencing a lot of problems at home and that the school's guidance counselor was aware of them. The spring, Joyce, contrary to a court order and without informing Lionel, moved out of the family home with David to live with relatives in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. Dahmer had just turned 18, remained in the family home. Dahmer's parents divorced and finalized on July 24th of 78. Joyce was awarded custody of their younger son and alimony payments. Late teens and early 20s, first murder of Stephen Hicks. Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978, 3 weeks after his graduation. On June 18th, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was 18 years old. Hicks, who had been hitchhiking to a rock concert in Chippewa Lake Park, agreed to accompany Dahmer to his house on the promise of a few beers with Dahmer, who had the house to himself. According to Dahmer, the sight of bare-chested Hicks standing at the roadside stirred his sexual feelings, although when Hicks began talking about girls, he knew any sexual passes he had made would be rebuffed. After several hours of talking, drinking, and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave, and I didn't want him to leave. Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell. He later stated he struck Hicks twice from behind with the dumbbell as Hicks sat upon a chair. When Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar of the dumbbell, then stripped the clothes off from Hicks' body before exploring his chest with his hands, then masturbating as he stood above the corpse. Hours later, Dahmer dragged the body to the basement. The following day, Dahmer dissected the body in the basement. He later buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. Several weeks later, he unearthed the remains and pared and flesh from the bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them in the woodland behind the family home. He threw Hicks' necklace and knife used to dismember him from the West Bath Road Bridge into the Cuyahoga River. College and Army service. 6 weeks after the murder of Hicks, Dahmer's father and his fiancee returned to his home where they discovered Dahmer living alone. That August, Dahmer enrolled at Ohio State University, hoping to major in business. Dahmer's sole term at OSU was completely unproductive, largely because of his persistent alcohol abuse. He received failing grades and an introduction to anthropology, classical civilizations, and administrative science. The only course Dahmer was successful at was riflery, where he received a B grade. His overall GPA was 0.45/4.0. On one occasion, Lionel paid a surprise visit to his son, only to find his dormitory room strewn with empty liquor bottles. Despite his father having to pay in advance for the second term, Dahmer dropped out of OSU just after 3 months. Dahmer, pictured in West Germany in 1979, his off-duty drinking caused him to be deemed unsuitable for military service in 1981. In January of '79, on his father's urging, Dahmer enlisted in the United States Army. He underwent basic training at Fort McLean in Anniston, Alabama, before training as a medical supplyist at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. He was occasionally reprimanded for intoxication while stationed at Fort Sam Houston. On one occasion, an instance of insubordination resulted in his entire platoon being punished, earning Dahmer a severe beating from his fellow recruits. Go to the comments here. See. Spooky fact: after Dahmer's arrest, neighbors reported phantom screams, cold drafts, and shadows moving. And yeah, I've heard that. I've heard even the house too. Okay, Della was. Thanks for coming in tonight. Russell, can you explain the left? You left the Paranormal Inc. network. Uh, Granzer, no, I'm not gonna. I can't do that on air. I'm not gonna dive into that. That is kind of a private matter. So, Dale, yes, we call choices in life. We take negative things and make them into positive things. Hey, Carol, welcome in. So, back to Jeffrey Dahmer. On July 13th of 1979, Dahmer was deployed in Baumholder, West Germany, where he served as a combat medic in the 2nd Battalion, 68th Armored Regiment, 8th Infantry Division. According to published reports, in Dahmer's first year of service, he was an average or slightly above average soldier. Owing to Dahmer's alcohol abuse, his performance deteriorated, and in March 90 of 81, he was deemed unsuitable for military service and was later discharged from the Army. He received an honorable discharge as his superiors did not believe that any problems Dahmer had in the Army would be applicable to civilian life. On March 24th of 81, Dahmer was sent to Fort Jackson in South Carolina for debriefing and provided with a plane ticket to travel anywhere in the country. Dahmer later told police he felt he could not return home to face his father, so he opted to travel to Miami Beach, Florida, both because he was tired of the cold and in an attempt to live by his own means. In Florida, Dahmer found a job at a delicatessen and rented a home in a nearby motel. He spent most of his salary on alcohol and was soon evicted from the motel for non-payment. Dahmer initially spent his earnings on the beach as he continued to work at the sandwich shop until phoning his father and asking to return to Ohio in September of the same year. He returned to Ohio and relocation to West Allis, Wisconsin. After his return to Ohio, Dahmer initially lived with his father and stepmother and insisted on being delegated numerous chores to occupy his time while he looked for work. He continued to drink heavily, and 2 weeks after his return, he was arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct, fined $60, and given suspended 10-day jail sentence. Dahmer's father tried unsuccessfully to wean his son off alcohol. In December of 1981, he and his second wife sent him to live with his paternal grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, in the West Allis, Wisconsin, as he was the only family member to whom Dahmer displayed as positivity or affection. They hoped that both her influence and the change of location might persuade him to quit drinking, find a job, and live responsible. Initially, Dahmer's living arrangements with his grandmother were harmonious and accompanied her to church, willingly undertook chores, actively sought work, and abided by most of her house rules, although he continued to drink and smoke. In the early in early 1982, he found employment as a phlebotomist in the Milwaukee Blood Plasma Center. He held this job for a total of 10 months before being laid off. Dahmer remained unemployed for 2 years, during which he lived upon whatever money his grandmother gave him. Shortly before losing his job, Dahmer was arrested for indecent exposure on August 8th of 1982 at the Wisconsin State Fair Park. He was observed exposing himself on the south side of the Coliseum, in which 25 people were persistent, including women and children. For this incident, he was convicted and fined $50 plus court costs. In January of '85, Dahmer was hired as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 6 nights per week, with Saturday evenings off. Shortly after he started this job, an incident occurred in which Dahmer was propositioned by another man while reading in the West Dallas Public Library. The stranger threw Dahmer a note offering to perform fellatio upon him. Although Dahmer did not respond to this proposition, the incident stirred the fantasies of control and dominance he had developed as a teenager, and he had begun to familiarize himself with the Milwaukee gay bars, gay bathhouses, and bookstores. He also stole a male mannequin from the store, which he briefly used for sexual stimulation until his grandmother discovered the item stowed in a closet and deemed that he discard it. By 1985, Dahmer began regularly frequent bathhouses, which he later described as being relaxing places, but during his sexual encounters, he became frustrated at his partners moving during the act. Following his arrest, he stated, "I trained myself to view people as objects of pleasure instead of people. For this reason, beginning in June 1986, he administered sleeping pills to his partners, giving them liquor laced with sedatives. He then waited for his partner to fall asleep before performing various sexual acts. To maintain an adequate supply of this medication, Dahmer informed doctors he worked nights and required the tablets to adjust to that schedule. After approximately 12 such instances, the bathhouses administration revoked Dahmer's membership, and he began to use hotel rooms to continue this practice. Shortly after his bathhouse memberships were revoked, Dahmer read a report in a newspaper regarding the upcoming funeral of an 18-year-old male. He conceived the idea of stealing the freshly interred corpse and taking it home. According to Dahmer, he attempted to dig up the coffin from the ground, but found soil too hard and abandoned the plan. September 8th of 1986, Dahmer was arrested upon the charge of lewd and lascivious behavior for masturbating in the presence of two 12-year-old boys as he stood close to the Kinnickinnic River. He initially claimed he had merely been urinating, unaware that there were witnesses, but soon admitted the offense. The charge was changed to disorderly conduct, and on March 10th, '87, Dahmer was sentenced to 1 year probation with additional instructions to undergo counseling. Late 20s, early 30s, on November 20th of '87, Dahmer, at that time still residing with his grandmother, encountered a 25-year-old man from Ontogon, Michigan, named Stephen Toomey at a bar and persuaded him to return to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Dahmer had rented a room for the evening. According to Dahmer, he had no intentions of killing Toomey, but intended to simply drug him and lie beside him as he explored his body. The following morning, Dahmer woke to find Toomey lying beneath him on the bed, his chest crushed in and black and blue with bruises. Blood was seeping from the corner of his mouth. Dahmer's fist and one forearm were extensively bruised. Dahmer later said he had no memory of having killed Toomey, and at that he could not believe this had happened. Dahmer purchased a large suitcase in which he transferred Toomey's body to his grandmother's residence. 1 week later, he severed the head, arms, and legs, then filleted the bone from the body before cutting the flesh into pieces small enough to handle. Dahmer placed the flesh inside plastic garbage bags. He wrapped the bones inside a sheet and pounded them into splinters with a sledgehammer. This dismemberment process took Dahmer approximately 2 hours. He disposed of all of Tommy's remains, excluding the head, in the trash. For 2 weeks following Tommy's killing, Dahmer retained Tommy's head wrap in a blanket. After 2 weeks, Dahmer boiled the head in a mixture of Solex, an alkali-based industrial detergent, and bleach in an effort to retain the skull, which he then used the stimulus for masturbation. Eventually, the skull became too brittle by this bleaching process, so Dahmer pulverized and disposed of it. Intermediate murders. According to Dahmer, Toomey's murder was a pivotal incident after which he did not try to control his compulsions. He began to actively seek victims, most of whom encountered in and around gay bars, and would typically lure them to his grandmother's home. He would drug his victims with trilozam and temazepam before or shortly after engaging in sexual activity with them. Once his victim was unconscious, he strangled them to death. 2 months after Tommy's killing, Dahmer encountered 14-year-old Native American prostitute James Doxter. Dahmer lured him into his grandmother's residence with an offer of $50 to pose for nude pictures. They engaged in sexual activities before Dahmer drugged Doxtator and strangled him on the floor of the cellar. Dahmer left the body in the cellar for 1 week before dismembering it in much of the same manner he had with Tommy. He placed all Doxter's remains, including the skull, in the trash. The skull was boiled and cleansed in bleach, for Dahmer found had too, that it too had been rendered brittle by the process. He pulverized the skull 2 weeks later. On March 24th of 88, Dahmer met 22-year-old bisexual man Richard Guerrero outside a gay bar called the Phoenix. Dahmer lured Guerrero to his grandmother's residence, offering him 50 to spend the night with him, drugged Guerrero with sleeping pills, strangled him with a leather strap, and performed oral sex on the corpse. Dahmer dismembered Guerrero's body within 24 hours, again disposing of the remains in the trash and retaining the skull before pulverizing it several months later. On April 2nd, Dahmer lured Ronald Flowers Jr. to his house. However, after giving Flowers drugged coffee, both he and Flowers heard Dahmer's grandmother call, "Is that you, Jeff?" Although Dahmer replied in a manner that led his grandmother to believe he was alone, she observed that he was not alone. Because of this, Dahmer was unable to kill Flowers. After Flowers became unconscious, Dahmer took him to County General Hospital. In September of 1988, Dahmer's grandmother asked him to move out, largely because of his drinking, his habits of bringing young men to her house late at night, and the foul smells emanating from the basement and the garage. Dahmer found a one-bedroom apartment at 808 North 24th Street and moved into the residence on September 25th. 2 days later, he was arrested for drugging and sexually fondling a 13-year-old boy who he had lured to his home on the pretext of posing nude for photographs. Dahmer's father hired an attorney, Gerald Boyle, to defend his son. At Boyle's request, Dahmer underwent a series of psychological evaluations prior to his court hearings. The evaluations found that Dahmer harbored deep feelings of alienation. The second evaluation 2 months later revealed Dahmer to be an impulsive individual, suspicious of others, and dismayed by the lack of accomplishments in life. His probation officer also referenced an '87 diagnosis of Dahmer suffering from schizoid personality disorder presentation to the court. On January 30th of '89, Dahmer pled guilty to the charges of second-degree sexual assault, of enticing a child for immoral purposes. Sentencing was suspended until May. On March 20th, Dahmer commenced a 10-day Easter absence from work, during which he moved back into his grandmother's home. 2 months after his conviction, 2 months prior to his sentence, Dahmer murdered a fifth victim, 24-year-old mixed-race aspiring model Anthony Sears, whom he met at a gay bar on March 25th, 1989. According to Dahmer, this particular occasion, he was not looking to commit a crime. However, shortly before closing time that evening, Sears just started talking to me. Dahmer lured Sears to his grandmother's home, where the pair engaged in oral sex before Dahmer drugged and strangled Sears. Following morning, Dahmer placed the corpse in his grandmother's bathtub, where he decapitated the body before attempting to flay the corpse. He stripped the flesh from the body and pulverized the bones, which he disposed in the trash, according to Dahmer. He found Sears exceptionally attractive, and Sears was the first victim whom he permanently retained any body parts. He preserved Sears' head and genitalia in the acetone and stored them in a wooden box, which he later placed in his work locker. When he moved to the new address the following year, he took the remains there. In 1989, on May 23rd, Dahmer was sentenced to 5 years probation, 1 year in House of Corrections, with work release permitted so he could keep his job. He was also required to register as a sex offender. 2 months before scheduled release, Dahmer was paroled from this regimen. 5 years probation imposed in '89 began. At this point, Dahmer temporarily moved back to his grandmother's home in West Ellis. Oxford Apartments, the 1990 murders. On May 14th, 1990, Dahmer moved out of his grandmother's house and back into 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, taking Sears' mummified head and genitals with him. Although located in a high crime area, Dahmer's new apartment was close to his workplace, was furnished at and at $300 per month exclusive, all the bills excluding electricity, was economical. Within 1 week of moving to this address, Dahmer killed his sixth victim, Raymond Smith. Smith was a 32-year-old prostitute whom Dahmer lured to his apartment with the promise of $50 for sex. Inside the apartment, he gave him a drink laced with 7 sleeping pills and manually strangled him. The following day, Dahmer purchased a Polaroid camera, with which he took several pictures of Smith's body in suggestive positions before dismembering him in the bathroom. He boiled the legs, arms, and pelvis in a steel kettle of Soilax, which allowed him to rinse the bones in the sink. Dahmer dissolved the remainder of Smith's skeleton, including the skull, in a container filled with acid. He later painted Smith's skull, which he placed alongside the skull of Sears upon the black towel inside a filling cabinet. Approximately 1 week later, after the murder of Smith, on about May 27, Dahmer lured another young man to his apartment. On this occasion, Dahmer accidentally consumed the drink laden with sedatives intended for his guest. When he awoke the following day, he discovered the man had stolen several items of clothing, $300, and a watch. Dahmer never reported this incident to the police, although on May 29th, he divulged to his probation officer that he had been robbed. On June 1990, Dahmer lured 27-year-old acquaintance Edward Smith to his apartment. where he drugged and strangled him on this occasion rather than immediately acidifying the skeleton or repeated previous processes of bleaching, which had rendered previous victims' skulls brittle. Dahmer placed Smith's skeleton in the freezer for several months in the hope it would not retain moisture. Freezing the skeleton did not remove moisture, and the skeleton of this victim was acidified several months later. Dahmer accidentally destroyed the skull when he placed it in the oven to dry, a process that caused the skull to explode. Dahmer later informed police that he had felt rotten about Smith's murder and had been unable to retain any parts of his body. It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep, if I couldn't keep them there with me whole, I at least kept their skeleton. So that's a little bit on Jeffrey Dahmer. And it looks like he spanned even through like 1991 of murders of all men. What about Gacy? Yeah, he'll be my next serial killer show I do. Yeah, they are horrible crimes that they did. Amazing how many times police officers actually had serial killers in custody and just let them. Yeah, nighty night, Nolan. Have a good night, Brandy. So we're gonna. I think we need to leave the. So we're gonna move on to our next one. This is another one that's kind of like Jeffrey Dahmer. He's well known and he comes from the Wisconsin area. He is known as the notorious Ed Gein, known as the Plainsfield Butcher. He cannibal, grave robber, torture victims, especially women. He would. This is where they got the movie Psycho from. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was another movie that they got, is based off of Ed Gein. Um, there is several movies made about Ed Gein. One of them is a real good one um, that was made. Another one by my favorite actor, Kane Hodder, that actually depicts the real life story of Ed Gein. Um, he captured everything that Ed Gein did to his victims, everything. And then you've got the Psycho, the Lost Tapes of Ed Gein, which, like the movie Psycho, is based on uh, Ed Gein as well. And then you have the movie where Charlie Hunnam from the Sons of Anarchy TV show plays Ed Gein. So we're gonna dive into the Plainsfield Butcher. He's got a long history here, so I'm gonna try and cut it down a little bit because this one will probably keep us going all night. Um, he was known as Edward Theodore Gein. He was born August 27, 1906. He died in July of 26 in 1984, also known as the Butcher of Plainsfield or the Plainsfield Ghoul. He was an American murderer, suspected serial killer, and body snatcher. Gein's crimes committed around his hometown of Plainsfield, Wisconsin. gathered widespread notoriety in 1957 after authorities discovered that he had exhumed corpses from the local graveyards and fashioned keepsakes from their bones and skin. He also confessed to killing two women, tavern owner Mary Hogan in 1954 and hardware store owner Bernice Warden in 1957. Gain was initially found unfit to stand trial and confined to a mental health facility. By 1968, he was judged competent to stand trial and was found guilty of the murder of Warden, but was found legally insane and thus was remanded to a psychiatric institution. Gain died at the Mendota Mental Health In- Institute from respiratory failure resulting from lung cancer on July 26, 1984. He was aged 77. He is buried next to his family in the Plainsfield Cemetery in a now unmarked grave. And we're going to dive into Ed's childhood. You don't want to do Ed, right? Yeah, I know, right? Seeing that SOA Jax is him, yeah, that's I I couldn't see him. I've never seen that movie. I'm gonna have to look that up and watch that one and see how that one is. But I have seen this movie of him, and this movie is good. I mean, he it talks about it catches right on the history of Ed Gein. Um, Ed Gein's early childhood. Edward Theodore Gein was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin on October 27th of 1906, second of two sons of George Philip Gein, 1873 to 1940, and Augusta Willingham Gein, 1878 to 1945. Gein had an older brother named Henry. Augusta, who was fervently religious and normally Lutheran, frequently preached to her sons about the intimate immortality of the world, the evil of drinking, and her belief that all women were naturally promiscuous and instruments of the devil. She reserved every afternoon, to read them from the Bible, usually selecting verses from the Old Testament and the book of Revelation concerning death, murder, and divine retribution. Jane idolized and became obsessed with his mother. George Gein worked as a carpenter, tanner, and in the city fire department. He also owned a local grocery shop, but soon sold the business and left the city with his family to live on the 155-acre farm in the town of Plainsfield, Wisconsin, which became their permanent residence. Augusta took advantage of the farm's isolation by turning away outsiders who could have influenced her son. 1930 U.S. Census with Gein, 13th name from the top in the Plainsfield, Wisconsin. Gein left the farm only to attend school. Outside of school, he spent most of his time doing chores on the farm. Gein was shy. Classmates and teachers remembered him as having strange mannerisms such as seemingly random laughter, as if he were laughing at his own personal jokes. Augusta punished Gein whenever he tried to make friends. According to the family acquaintance, despite his poor social development, Gein did fairly well in school, particularly in reading. Deaths in the immediate family. On April 1st, 1940, Gein's father died of heart failure at the age of 66. Gein and his brother Henry began doing odd jobs around town to help cover living expenses. The brothers were generally considered reliable and honest by the rest of the community. While both worked as handymen, Gein also frequently babysat for neighbors. He enjoyed babysitting, seeming to relate more easily to children than adults. Henry began dating a divorced mother of two and planned to move in with her. He worried about his brother's attachment to their mother and often spoke ill of her around Geen, who responded with shock and hurt. On May 16th of 44, Geen was burning away marsh vegetation on the property. The fire got out of control, drawing the attention of the local fire department. By the end of the day, the fire having been extinguished and the firefighters gone, Geen reported Henry missing. With lanterns and flashlights, a search party searched for 43-year-old Henry, whose dead body was found laying face down. Apparently, Henry had been dead for some time, and it appeared that the cause of death was heart failure since he had not been burned or injured otherwise. Later reported by biographer Harold Shader that Henry had bruises on his head. Police dismissed the possibility of foul play, and the county coroner later officially listed asphyxiation as the cause of death. Authorities accepted the accident theory, but no official investigation was conducted and an autopsy was not performed. Questioning Geen about the death of Bernice Worden in 57, state investigator Joe William Mosky brought up questions about Henry's death. George Arnott, who studied the case, wrote that in retrospect it was possible and likely that Henry's death was the Geen and Abel aspect of this case. While Henry deceased, Ed and Augusta were now alone. Augusta had a paralyzing stroke shortly after Henry's death, and Ed devoted himself to taking care of her. Sometime in 1945, her later recounted he and his mother visited a man named Smith, who lived nearby, to purchase straw. According to Ed, Augusta witnessed Smith feeding a dog. A woman inside Smith's residence came out and yelled for him to stop, but Smith beat the dog to death. Augusta was extremely upset by the scene. However, what bothered her did not appear to be a brutality toward the dog, but rather the presence of the woman. Augusta told Ed that the woman was not married to Smith and she had no business being there, and angrily called her Smith's harlot. She had a second stroke soon after, and her health deteriorated rapidly. Augusta died on December 29th of 1945 at the age of 67. Ed was devastated by her death. In the words of Shader, he had lost his only friend and one true love, and he was absolutely alone in the world. Work Gain held on to the farm, earned money from odd jobs. He boarded up rooms used by his mother, including the upstairs, downstairs, parlor, and living room, leaving them untouched. While the rest of the house became increasingly squalid, these rooms remained pristine. Dean lived thereafter in a small room next to the kitchen. Around this time, he became interested in reading pulp magazines and adventure stories, particularly in those involving cannibals or Nazi acolytes, specifically concerning Elish Kosh, who selected tattoo pioneers for death in order to fashion lampshades and other items from their skins. Gain received a farm subsidy from the federal government starting in 1951. He occasionally worked for the local municipal road crew and crop threshing crews in the Plainsville area, sometime between 46 and 56. He also sold an 80-acre parcel of land that Henry had owned. Crimes confirmed on the morning of November 16th, 58-year-old Plainsville hardware store owner Bernice Wooden disappeared. Hardware store's truck was seen driving out to the rear of the building at around 9:30 a.m. The hardware store saw a few customers the entire day. Some area residents believe that this was because of deer hunting season. Warden's son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, entered the store around 5 p.m. to find the cash register open and bloodstains on the floor. Frank Warden told investigators that On the evening before his mother's disappearance, Geen had been in the store and was expected to return the next morning for a gallon of antifreeze. A sales slip for the antifreeze was the last receipt written by Warden on the morning that she disappeared. That evening, Geen was arrested at the Plainsfield grocery store, and the Washoe County Sheriff's Department searched the Geen farm. A sheriff's deputy discovered Warden's decapitated body in the shed on Geen's property, hung upside down by her legs, with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes at her wrists. Torso was dressed out like a deer. She had been shot with a 22 caliber rifle, and the mutilations were made after her death. Searching the house, the authorities found whole human bones and fragments, 29 of them, a waste basket made of human skin, 30 of them, human skull covering several chairs, 31 of them, skulls on his bedpost, 32, female skulls, some with toes sewn off, bowls made from human skulls, a corset made from a female torso skin from shoulders to waist, leggings made from human leg skin, masks made from the skin from female heads, Mary Hogan's face mask in a paper bag, Mary Hogan's skull in a box, Bernice Wooden's entire head in a burlap sack, Bernice Wooden's heart in a plastic bag in front of Geen's potbelly stove, nine values, nine valvas in a shoebox, a young girl's dress, and the valvas of two females judged to have been about 15 years old, a belt made from female human nipples, four noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of human face, fingernails from female fingers. These artifacts were photographed at the state crime laboratory and then decently disposed of. When questioned, Geen told investigators that between 1947 and 1952, he had made as many as 40 nocturnal visits to three local graveyards to exhume recently buried bodies while he was in a dazed-like state. On about 30 of those visits, he said he had came out of the daze while in the cemetery, left the grave in good order, and returned home empty-handed. On the other occasions, he dug up the graves recently buried middle-aged women and thought resembled his mother and took their bodies home where he tanned their skins to make his paraphernalia. He admitted stealing from 9 graves that led investigators to their locations. Alan Wilimski said that State Crime Laboratory participated in opening 3 test graves identified by Geen. The caskets inside wooden boxes at the top boards ran crossways, not lengthwise. Tops of the boxes were about 2 feet below the surface in sandy soil. Geen had robbed the graves soon after the funerals while the graves were not completed. The test graves were exhumed because authorities were uncertain as to whether the slight Geen was capable of slightly handling digging up a grave during a single evening. They were found as Geen described. One casket was empty, another casket was empty but contained a few bones and Geen's crowbar. And the final casket saw most of the body missing, yet Geen had returned the rings, some body parts. Thus, Geen's confession was largely corroborated. Soon after his mother's death, Geen began to create women's suits so that he could become his mother, to literally crawl into her skin. He denied having sex with the bodies he exhumed, explaining they smelled too bad. During state crime laboratory interrogation, Geen also admitted to shooting 51-year-old Mary Hogan, a tavern owner missing since December 8th of 1954, whose head found in his house, but he later denied memory of details of her death. A 16-year-old youth whose parents were friends of Geen, who attended baseball games and movies with him, reported that Geen kept shrunken heads in his house, which he had described as relics sent by a cousin who had served in the Philippines during World War II. Upon investigation by police, these were determined to be human facial skins, carefully peeled from corpses and used by Geen as masks. In addition to the murders of Hogan Warden, Geen was also considered regarding several other unsolved cases in Wisconsin. In November 57, authorities confronted Geen with a list of missing person cases that occurred between the deaths of his mother and Warden. Their suspicions were further aroused after the discovery of Hogan's remains. However, lie detector tests exonerated Geen of any other murders, and his psychiatrist concluded that his violence was only directed to the women who physically resembled his mother. Georgia Jean Weckler, 8, disappeared near her farm in Fort Atkinson at approximately 3:30 p.m. on May 1st, 1947. She was given a lift home from school by a neighbor who dropped Weckler off at the lane and led from US Highway 12 to the Weckler farm. Weckler was last seen pausing to open the family mailbox and removing a stack of mail. Witnesses reported seeing a dark color, possibly black 1936 Ford sedan, the gray plastic spotlight in the vicinity that afternoon. Dean owned a black 37 Ford. Evelyn Grace Hartley, 14, went missing while babysitting 20-month-old girl at home of a La Crosse State College professor, Viggo Rasmussen, on that evening of October 24th, 53 in La Crosse. That evening, her father, Richard, called the Rasmussen house several times after she failed to check in as planned at 8:30 and received no answer. Concerned, he drove to the Rasmussen house to find the doors were locked, lights and radio on, and items scattered all over the house. Living room furniture had been moved around different places, where Evelyn's school books. Richard found her shoes in different rooms, one room upstairs and one downstairs. He also found his daughter's broken glasses upstairs. Richard did not find Evelyn in the house. After his arrest, Geen was questioned regarding Evelyn's disappearance. However, he denied involvement in the disappearance and passed 2 lie detector tests. Police found no trace of Evelyn's remains during the search of Geen's property. Victor Harold Travis, 42, residents of Adams County, went off to deer hunt in the company of acquaintance Raymond Burgess on November 1st, 52. In the late afternoon, the pair stopped for refreshments at Max Bar in Plainsfield for several hours. Around 7 p.m., they both left the bar, got into Burgess' car, and drove away. The hunters, along with the car Burgess was driving, were never seen again, and no trace of them were ever found. Travis and Burgess had been hunting on the farm next to the Geen farm, despite objections to them hunting on the day of their disappearance. In addition, Geen has also been tentatively linked to the June 54 disappearance of neighbor James Walsh. Walsh and his wife lived near Geen, who performed chores for her after her husband went missing. Geen was also investigated for potential involvement in the August 56 disappearance of Irene Keaton, 30, who was last seen in Plainsfield, in the attempt abduction of Judy Chronicle 16 from Aryville aftermath. On November 21st of 1957, Geen was arraigned on one count of first-degree murder in Rorschach County Court, where he pleaded not guilty by reasons of insanity. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found mentally incompetent, thus unfit for trial. He was sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane, now the Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security facility in Waupun, later transferred to the Mendota State Hospital in Madison. 68, they determined Gein was mentally able to confer with counsel and participate in his defense. The trial began November 7th of 68, and lasted 1 week. The psychiatrist testified that Gein had told him that he did not know whether killings of Warden were intentional or accidental. Gein had told him that while he examined a gun in Wooden's store, the weapon discharged and killed Warden. He said he had not aimed the rifle at Warden and did not remember anything else happened that morning. At the request of the defense, Gein's trial was held without jury, with Judge Robert H. Golmack presiding. Gein was found guilty by Golmack on November 14th. Second trial dealt with Gein's sanity and testimony by doctors for the prosecution and defense. Gein ruled Gein not guilty by reason of insanity and ordered him committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. Gein spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. Judge Golmack wrote, due to prohibitive costs, Gein was tried for only one murder, that of Mrs. Warden. He would also admit to killing Mary Hogan. Beta Gein's property, Gein's house, and outbuildings on his 195-acre property were appraised at $4,700, equivalent to $51,000 in 2024. His possessions were scheduled to be auctioned on May 30th, 1958, amidst rumors that the house and the land it stood on might be a tourist attraction. Early on the morning of March 20th, the house was destroyed by fire. A deputy fire marshal reported that a garbage fire had been set 75 feet from the house by a cleaning crew who was given the task of disposing refuse, and the hot coals were recovered from the spot of the bonfire, but that the fire did not spread along the ground from the location to the house. Arson was suspected, but the cause of fire was never officially determined. It is possible that the fire was not considered a matter of urgency to Fire Chief Frank Warden, son of Gein's victim, Bernice Warden. When Gein learned of the incident while in detention, he shrugged and said, just as well. Gein's Ford sedan, which he used to haul the bodies of his victim, was sold at public auction for $760, equivalent to $8,300 in 2024, to Carnival sideshow operator Bunny Gibbons. Gibbons charged Carnival goers 25 cents admission fee to see it. Death. Gein's vandalized grave marker, as it appeared in 1999 before thieves stole it. Gein died at Mendota State Mental Health Institute due to respiratory failure, secondary lung cancer on July 6, 1984, at the age of 77. Over the years, souvenir seekers chipped away pieces from his gravestone until the stone itself was stolen in 2000. It was recovered on June 2001 near Seattle, Washington, and was placed in storage at the Washoe County Sheriff's Department. Gein is interred between his parents and brother in Plainsfield Cemetery. His gravesite is now unmarked, but not unknown. Gein's story had lasting effect on American popular culture, evidenced by its some numerous appearances in film, music, and literature. The tale first came to widespread public attention in a fictionalized version presented by Robert Bloch in his 1959 suspense novel Psycho. The addition to Alfred Hitchcock's 60s film of Bloch's novel Psycho, Gein's story was loosely adapted in numerous films, including Deranged in 1974, In the Light of the Moon 2000, released in the United States and Australia, Ed Gein in 2001, Ed Gein the Butcher of Plainsfield in 2007, Ed Gein the Musical in 2010, and Rob Zombie's film House of a Thousand Corpses and its sequel, The Devil's Rejects. Gein served as the inspiration for the myriad fictional serial killers, most notably Norman Bates' Psycho, Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Buffalo Bill, The Silence of the Lambs, Garland Green, Con Air, and the character of Dr. Oliver Thredson in the TV series American Horror Story Asylum. American filmmaker Ira Horus, German filmmaker Werner Herzog attempted to unsuccessfully collaborate one a film project about Gein. From 75 to 76, Morris claimed to have interviewed Gein several times and ended up spending almost a year in Plainsfield interviewing dozens of locals. The pair planned secretly to exhume Gein's mother from her grave to test the theory, but never followed through on the scheme and eventually ended their collaboration. The absorbed project was described in a 1989 New Yorker profile of Morris. Gein's story inspired American grunge band Tad to write the song Nipple Belt for their '89 album God's Balls. Gein inspired American thrash metal band Slayer to write the song Dead Skin Mask for their '90 album Seasons in the Abyss. Additionally, Gein was the inspiration namesake for the song Nothing to Gain by American heavy metal band Mudvayne, released in 2000 on their album LD50. The character Patrick Bateman in the '91 novel American Psycho and its 2000 film adaptation mistakenly attributes a quote by Edmund Kemper to Gein saying, "You know what Ed Gein said about women? He said, when I see a pretty girl walking down the street, I think two things. One part of me wants to take her out, talk to her, be real nice and sweet, and treat her right. The other part of me wonders what her head would look like on a stick." In 2012, German director Georg Butterjit wrote the directed stage play about Gein's case title Cannibal Unde at Theater Dortmund in Germany. The part of Gein was played by actor Uwe Rollbeck. According to George W. Arndt, news reports at that time of the Gein's crime spawned a submerge of black humor called Geiners. 2002 game portrayed by Shane Kerwin appears in the first season Netflix anthology Monsters as a possible inspiration for serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes. However, a direct connection between the two is seen speculation. 2024, it was announced that Charlie Hunnam will portray Ed Gein in the original Monster, the third season of Monster, where Gein will be the primary focus of the season, a multi-part docuseries about Gein's life and upbringing titled Psycho, The Lost Tapes of Ed Gein. So there you have it about Ed Gein, which now you see inspired a ton of movies. Plainsfield Butcher, he inspired that Ed Gein movies, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, even Three from Hell. If you watch Three from Hell, Bill Moseley as Otis carves out a woman's face in the movie. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they were cannibals, and Ed Gein also used a chainsaw on his victims as well. So yeah, definitely check out the movies. I'm definitely going to check this one out. I haven't seen this one yet, but I have seen the Kane Hodder version of it. And I haven't seen this one yet, the lost tapes of it. But so that's a little bit. I hope you guys enjoyed it tonight and found it in a lot of information on it. Yeah, I'm surprised. You're right. I'm surprised they weren't killed in prison. Isn't it? Karen Jennings. This is Brian's friend who does paranormal investigations. Check her out. Okay, I will. There's nothing you can't buy this year. Said that the system's so messed up they probably should have kept him in custody due to so many arrests. Yeah, that is true. Surprised the other serial killers weren't killed in prison. Yeah, I know. Well, I think they kind of kept them more like in solitary where people couldn't get at them. They didn't put them in the general population, so they could people couldn't get at them. I mean, like I'm sure like Robert Berdella, the Kansas City butcher, when he was in Missouri State. Uh, yeah, I will do some more. I'll do some more serial killer stuff. I kind of enjoy the true crime. I'm also a big horror fan, so I will definitely do it again. Um, but yeah, like I was saying with Robert Berdella, the Kansas City butcher, I'm surprised they didn't keep him in a closed cell for what he did too. I know he crafted a lot of stuff and shanks and stuff in Missouri State. He had a lot of weapons because some of his weapons you can actually see them in the Missouri State Penitentiary Museum in the basement of the old warden's house. Um, he was he was also in there for that Missouri State Penitentiary riot, I believe. Um, and if you look there, with Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer, there's kind of the same coincidence as far as their background with human bodies and the human anatomy and making things. So again, for people that join us, you'll have to check out the replay. This is a recap. We were first ones we talked about tonight were the Ray and Faye Copeland, the famous serial killer couple from Mooresville, Missouri, which is near my neck of the woods. Um, they were farmers. Ray would bring in these drifters and hobos off the street, and so they Ray was murdering these drifters because they were buying cattle on bad checks. Ray was a fraud, so Ray would lure them into places and shoot them in the head, and then dispose of their bodies and on other farms so they wouldn't get caught. Well, one guy actually managed to get away, and he called Crime Stoppers and turned them in, and they were both arrested. Ray died in prison. He was supposed to get lethal injection, but he died before he got the lethal injection. Faye died in a nursing home. Uh, she never talked after that. She died in a nursing home in Chillicothe, Missouri. I know exactly the nursing home where she died. Um, but she was actually taking the drifters' clothes and knitting quilts out of them. They found the blood stains on them. Russell, do you ever wonder what conversation? Yeah, I know it would be having a conversation with them. Well, the only one you could still have a conversation with would be Dennis Rader. He's the only one that's still alive out of this whole crew. Um, in fact, if he's still watching, look up BTK photography. He's working on a book right now. He interviewed BTK. So he's got a book coming out, so look for it and it's on BTK. That was a long stream I had to lay. Right? Yeah. Well, we're not gonna be having a show next weekend. We are gonna be in Gettysburg next weekend, so there will not be a podcast next weekend. So that's why I did a 3-hour show tonight to make up for it. Um, we are gonna be at the orphanage and Jenny Wade House with Nesper, the Devils on the Run tour. We're gonna be out there visiting them and checking out the battlefields. I'm gonna go out to Reynolds Woods and do some investigating with my cousin Michael and my dad, and we're gonna go out to Ghostly Images of Gettysburg and meet with them and check out the rest of the battlefields that we didn't get to do last time we were out there. So we'll be live from Gettysburg. I'll go live from the battlefields and give everybody a tour like I did the last time. We're leaving Tuesday morning and we'll be back on Sunday. So we're gonna go ahead and get ready to close the show out here. I thank you all for hanging in tonight, and hope you guys love the show. I definitely will do more on the serial killers. I will definitely do John Wayne Gacy. No, I don't edit my shows. I just leave them just how they are. I don't edit anything. They just stay how they are on my page. That way, so if you're driving on a long trip and you want to listen to a podcast, you can tune into mine and then you can listen to it on your way. So I don't edit any of them. I'm used to public speaking. My voice is starting to get a little bit, so but I've done public speaking quite a bit. I used to be a DJ, so I'm used to talking on the mic and screaming on mics and being loud, doing emceeing and stuff. So we're gonna go ahead and close the show. I thank you all for joining me tonight. Stay safe out there. Hope you guys are all having a good 4th of July weekend. Don't blow your hands off. Stay safe with them fireworks. Um, Remember, if you're being bullied in the paranormal field, you do have a voice. Feel free to reach out to us. We will listen to you. No judgment here. We'll listen to you. We rather listen to you and listen to your story. So be sure to reach out to us if you're being bullied in the paranormal field, and we will listen. We do have a heart. So, with that being said, everybody have a good night. God bless. And I will see you when I get back from Gettysburg. So, like I said, we'll be live on the group page or my personal page, and I'll give you guys a tour of the battlefields and stuff like that. If Nesper lets me go live, I'll go live from the investigation too. So, we will talk to you all soon. Have a good night. Stay safe, and God bless.